We are live.
Okay, awesome.
Hello, everyone. So today it's not going to be too much of a fun stream like like I've had many a time on this channel. We are talking about some quite deadly serious issues today. But we're talking about the end of the Afghanistan War, what that means, how we can look at this historically, but both Tariq and I here have a very personal experience with Afghanistan, and considering Hikma history, um, is you might remember that I did an episode a while back about the causes of the the Afghanistan War. The that he did a collaboration on that, and that's partially because he has very close ties to Afghanistan, and I do as well. I fought for a year there, and so this watching what has been happening in Afghanistan has been gut wrenching, to say the least. So a little bit about me and why I'm talking about this. The Afghanistan War and my experience in it has not only, something that I did once, but has actually significantly affected my life. I joined the army to pay for college when I was deployed to Afghanistan in 2009 to 2010, right during the surge. That really was a formative time and has affected my scholarship all the way along. So when I came back, I actually was an architecture major at the time, but when I came back, I ended up switching to history. And at first, I studied American Small Wars because the Afghanistan War is an American Small War. And the so like I wrote my capstone paper in undergrad on that. Now I eventually moved on to American violence, but you could see how American violence is somewhat related.
Yeah.
So literally what I do is still related to my experience in Afghanistan. What I do on this channel, and what I do during writing my dissertation and everything. So watching what's unfolding, I not only have that historical point of view, but I also have a very personal point of view. In fact, I was looking up somebody that I knew back then, and I found out that he was killed in 2020. So by the Taliban. So this is not going to be a nice stream. Which is why I'm busting out a nice bottle of wine. So, with all of that being said, I'll hand it over to you and talk about, because you have your own story to tell when it comes to Afghanistan.
Right. Yeah. Well, firstly, thank you for that introduction. But my name is Tarek. I'm the guy behind Hikma History. I'm originally from Afghanistan. I was born there. I spent the first few years of my life there as well. And I'm also actually doing a PhD going into my third year on 20th century Afghan history. And you can check out my YouTube channel, which has a bunch of Afghan history videos. I'm actually working on one for next week. It's going to be on the second Anglo-Afghan War.
Below, everyone. His channel is linked below in the description.
So yeah, obviously I have a very personal affinity with the country and the culture and whatnot.
And and you still have family there, right?
So, yeah, in fact, most of my family.
And
they're still there.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be having trouble even getting a hold of them right now, right?
It's a really weird thing, man. I mean, politics is really confusing in Afghanistan at the moment. If you just see how quickly the Taliban took over, and even the way they're acting now.
Yeah, they're actually saying stuff about they're going to be more open to women's rights and that kind of thing, and it's like
exactly. And there's a lot of people. exactly. That's like very new from you guys, but a lot of people are appreciative of what they're doing, which is really weird. Like even my family, they're not necessarily super involved in politics. All they care about is just like, I don't know, living a normal life. So the fact that the Taliban have come and it's peace and security in their region, they're like super happy, which is funny because when you contrast that with, say, for instance, the experiences that you spoke about with your friend, being killed and whatnot, it's very different. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it's also like because my region, my province was Kunar province, which is of course for those who don't know was basically the most combat heavy province in the entire entirety of the country. You had Helmand and Kandahar that were rivaling it, but Kunar's much smaller compared to those two. I think
Mm.
Kandahar is actually the second biggest city in the country.
Yeah, but those,
Um,
to be fair, those two provinces, they're very like deserty.
oh
So
yeah,
the population, they get centered around certain urban centers and whatnot.
yeah, yeah. And in in Kunar we had Asadabad, which was um, quite a big city. I think it had more than 1 million people. Um,
Okay.
but but it was just one of many cities in the province.
Right.
Um, it was big for sure, but and my fob was what's called fob right, and it was uh, literally just down the street from the city, um, down what's called Route California, um, and yeah, that was um, quite a bit different from because you said your folks are in Paktika. Um,
Paktia, yeah.
yeah, and there has, I mean, if they're talking about that it was that the Taliban has brought around and peace, it must have gotten a lot worse than what it was back in 2010.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, but see, this is the funny thing with what's going on here is a lot of people. I don't know how to say this. People are approaching this with their own biases and whatnot. And to be fair, I'm not really saying anything groundbreaking here because as human beings, we're naturally prone to having biases. But when I think the healthiest way to like analyze the situation is to think about it from the perspective of an Afghan. And I mean that strategically as well. I get it that an American's self-interest comes before an Afghan's. That's not like as long as it doesn't, go through certain humane restrictions and whatnot. I get it. Self interest is just an inherent feature of human nature. But even strategically speaking, if you look at this from the lens of an Afghan, this won't be as shocking to you, and there won't be as much resistance to, say, like a Taliban government if you think about this from the perspective of an Afghan. Like, of course, there's going to be differences. Of course, there's going to be people who hate the Taliban and who remember what they did before. But there are loads of people that are saying, I don't care about ideology. I don't really care about the political spectrum that you, whatever it is. All I want is peace and stability to be able to like live my life. And because of the strong way that the Taliban have been able to emerge victorious in the last 2 weeks, it's been almost ridiculous. It's given people that chance. So a lot of people, they're literally appreciative of the fact that they can go about their normal day-to-day life. Now, a lot has to be seen for us to pass a final judgment on the Taliban. Like, I'm not convinced that they're completely different from 96 to 2001 and whatnot. But so far, everything, more or less everything they're doing, is like, who who is advising you? Is Henry Kissinger on the phone to you telling you what to do dot by dot? Like, is Niccolo Machiavelli? Have you guys been reading like Machiavelli's The Prince? It's been pretty remarkable, to be honest.
Uh,
But we have to wait and see, I guess.
yeah, the because the way that Afghanistan just like once the Taliban started their attack in July,
Hmm.
they just swept the country in a matter of a month and a half. And like to those of us who served there, it's quite shocking because I mean, some of us like literally were involved in training these people who were
Yeah.
supposed to resist him, and then it's like they're not fighting. Um, the
Right.
um, it's one of those things where it almost feels like a betrayal of everything we were doing. But I also think of that like looking at what came before with like the Soviets,
Mm.
who they probably felt the same way, that as they watched the communist government fall to during the Civil War, which didn't actually fully fall until I think
92.
1992. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, they were watching it fall. The Ring Road was taken over by '89. I mean, it was basically just Kabul
Mm.
um, by the '90s, but it did. It outlived the Soviet Union itself. So,
But
but
here's the thing. Like, I would push back a little bit of what you said, not towards the end, towards the beginning, because maybe I didn't give you enough time to like expand on this, so maybe you're thinking this anyway. But I would emphasize one point, that this failure, I don't think can be put on the shoulders of ordinary Afghan soldiers
yeah,
so much.
I think
I
it's
would say that
I think it's
the politicians,
mostly, yeah. It's the fact that the politicians just gave up immediately and fled the country.
dude, it's so embarrassed. It's I don't even have words for it, because honestly, and I don't even want to speak my mind or my what's on my heart and whatnot, because we'll get kind of explicit. But these politicians, the level of the corruption they showed, and I'm using that word very generically, because the the amount of corruption that was in the Afghan government, and not just financial corruption, just not buying into the vision of having an Afghanistan that could be better in the future, instead focusing on immediate gratification, in the sense of trying to take care of themselves and their close ones in the shape of nepotism,
Hmm.
whether that meant to bump up their cousin in a certain ministry who wasn't necessarily made for the job, or taking the money out, like a lot of these elite politicians did. I've read some crazy WikiLeaks articles about some of these people. I think that was it. I mean, because at the end of the day, you're a soldier, right, Cypher? You know this. If you don't have a leader that, when the going gets tough, you know that leader is going to be with you, there's going to be that doubt that creeps up into the back of your mind when the going gets tough, and your brain naturally wants to survive, and it's going to try to find a way out. And if you don't have a good leader, that finding that way out is going to be super easy. But having a great leader makes you get that inspiration to fight a little longer. And that's why there was no fight, because there was no motivation, as
Hmm.
opposed to these talibs who say whatever you want about them, but you can't doubt their motivation. Like, their motivation. Like, imagine 18 years ago, 2003, you tell a Talib, hey, in 18 years, you're essentially, with all due respect, going to defeat the Americans. Like, prevent them from achieving their aims. Not
Hmm.
necessarily defeat them militarily, but like, if somebody said that, they'll be like, nah, you're crazy. But
Yeah,
the Talib,
especially at the beginning of the war, the Taliban was just shoved off into the um they basically had no and no one was loyal to them at that point. They had uh Al Qaeda had basically fled the country, um or was hiding out in places that were quite remote. Um
yeah.
and like it seemed that we had won.
Hmm.
Um and somehow over the course of the last 20 years that's
Yeah.
changed, and part of that I think was in fact the fact that we changed from a purely punitive expedition, as in explicitly we were there for revenge,
Yeah.
to nation building, which this is something we really need to get um,
Okay.
into depth, because there's multiple ways of viewing the war,
Mm-hmm.
and from the Afghan perspective, it's
Mm.
mostly just another invasion. It's a lot of people. I remember people who legitimately thought we were just more Russians.
Yeah. Okay.
And and that's in 2010. That's
Cypher, when did you
25
serve in
years after the
Afghanistan?
fact, from oh nine
Which
to
years?
09 to 2010.
Okay. Okay. So in the middle, slap bang in the middle.
Yeah, I was
Huh.
I was in middle school when 9/11 happened, and I turned 21 in Afghanistan. But
Quite.
what's
Okay.
also interesting about my mission there is that I was very much part of the of that nation building effort.
Hmm.
I was part of what's called I was security forces for the provincial reconstruction team, Sec 4 for the PRT.
Okay.
And PRTs, what they do is that they basically shell out funding to build roads, schools. Like we even had like a big prison project in Kunar. Um, right, and that prison project was right up against a mountain that we called 1311, and that mountain was always infested with Talibans. But the the but that was part of this effort of that whole hearts and minds thing that we were trying to kind of get people to like the idea of a democratic government. And but that had a false incentive built within it. It had because essentially all we were doing was shelling out money to local companies, and we were doing it all through the governor of Kunar.
Right.
And
I know where this is going.
yeah, so he was probably. I mean, I don't know the politics of that particular politician, and I don't even remember his name. Although though he did get reelected while I was there, but the he was probably awarding contracts to his kin, people who
Yeah.
could basically. He was probably very corrupt. And we didn't really have any way of fighting that. The whole point was that I mean, all I'm doing is protecting the people who are doing the actual negotiations and all that. But like, they were going in and basically going like, "Hey, we need to build a road here. Who can we get to do it?" And you say, Semula over here, or and then probably his brother or something like that,
Yeah.
and then they'd start working on paving it, and we'd go out and inspect the paving, kind of lay out some engineering work for them, and that, of course, I'm just sitting there on a 50 cal, just waiting for them to get done. But the um the corruption of the government was basically guaranteed from the get-go, because of the way these projects were structured. It was basically
Yeah.
just throwing money at the problem, hoping that they'll like their new power power generating dam and stuff like that, and really really hate the Taliban because of that. And it's like, why would they hate the Taliban because of they got a new power plant?
Yeah.
Whether also, a lot of the time, the reason why we had to inspect all of these things so much is it was probably so corrupt, and that's why we kept on having to like reprimand them for not building the projects we were paying them for properly. Um,
I think about that all the time, like, because my friend sent me a video literally like an hour ago of how much money was spent in Afghanistan, and they just broke it down. It was actually by Forbes, so obviously they're going to do the financial breakdown. There was something like 2 trillion altogether, and they said something like 300 million per day, every day for the last 2 decades. And I think, with all due respect, I mean, obviously, this is not meant to be disrespectful to any American servicemen that necessarily lost their lives or whatnot. But I think America entered with the complete wrong mind state. Like I have two brothers, yeah. So I
Hmm.
have two brothers. They're both professional fighters, right? And so for them, like they've been doing it for a bunch of years. For them, the idea of going into a fight, being angry, being riled up, is just like me and you not knowing our ABCs. It's like that's the first step. Don't do that. And I think the way that America handled itself, especially in Afghanistan, but with all due respect, broadly around the world, its foreign policy in the
Oh,
Bush years was
so
just like it was like you know what it was. Somebody told me that. I think I forgot who it was. Told me this. It was like a mafia leader, like a Mexican cartel leader. Son had been just killed in broad daylight, and now the Mexican cartel leader just wants to go around and tell everybody like you
yeah,
shouldn't have done that. So just anybody that's in its sight that even like says anything to them is just getting yeah, it's just
that
being made an
was
example of.
there's a great movie called the Team America World Police that basically we became that. But
Right.
this gets kind of at the heart of what this stream is about, is what this war was, because it was we started off as being a punitive expedition. We went in there purely for revenge.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know what a punitive expedition is, it is when when the so a great example would be the Pershing punitive expedition of 1916, when which is very very analogous to what we've been doing for the last 20 years. In 1916, Pancho Villa, leader of what was called the Army of the North in Mexico, had basically bought into this conspiracy theory that that the U.S. was trying to turn Mexico into a protectorate, and basically lose all Mexican sovereignty. And so he attacked a town, actually in the state I'm in right now, Columbus, New Mexico,
Hmm.
right there on the border. Ended up killing, I believe, 18 or is it 28 Americans. So obviously nowhere close to the level of 9/11. Also, the
Yeah.
punitive expedition was nowhere close to the response.
Yeah.
But there was a response, and a guy named Blackjack Pershing. Um, he wasn't. His nickname was Blackjack. Um, Although it was actually supposed to be Eric Funston who would have led the expedition, but he ended up getting sick. But the Pershing led this small expedition, mostly cavalry, going after Villa. Now, he actually didn't have specific orders to capture Villa. His main goal was to destroy the Villaistas.
Hmm.
And he did that fairly effectively, but he never could catch Villa
Hmm.
himself. And in fact, Villa would attack the U.S. a couple more times, and especially in Good Springs, Texas.
Hmm.
But we ended up clashing with the Carranza government, who was actually in charge of Mexico. And it came very close to possibly ending up with a whole war with Mexico again, like an actual declared war.
Hmm.
And that didn't happen, but it came
This is
close.
around the time of the Zimmerman telegram as well, right?
Exactly. And then the
Right.
Zimmerman telegram came out. We started pulling out of Mexico throughout early 1917. Then we see that Zimmerman telegram, and World War One is on. Then we
Okay.
go fight in Europe instead. So while the war itself wasn't really the same at all there, the purpose was. The
Yeah.
purpose was exactly the same. Um,
Right.
and of course, the difference was the Carranza government, even though Carranza had actually fought with, like, there's actually pictures of Carranza, Obregon, and Villa standing all in a row right next to Blackjack Pershing. because for a little bit in there they were basically allies. So there
Hmm.
are actually a lot of parallels here, because in the
Yeah.
80s, Osama bin Laden was basically an ally.
Yeah.
Though it wasn't that direct, and we need to hit those myths, because there's a lot of people who seem to think that the U.S. supported the Taliban, which is just no. Um,
Yeah.
but the point is that that's what a real punitive expedition is. It is
Yeah.
it is pure revenge,
Hmm.
and they also tend to fail a lot. Either that, or nowadays most punitive expeditions are in the form of like a few cruise missiles or something like that.
Right.
Essentially every time somebody does something, and then we lob a few cruise missiles at an airport or something like that. That is
Yeah.
essentially a punitive expedition.
The
Um,
thing I feel like the thing that's different with Afghanistan, from what you're talking about slightly, is that America decided, okay, I'm going to act in this punitive manner. Okay, 2002, 2003, 2004. But I
mhm,
know I'm going to stay in this country as I'm doing this. Like, I can get, trust me, I'm not, like, I read Machiavelli when I was like 15 years old. But, like, I understand, like, international politics and whatnot. And sometimes you do need to punish somebody who has a different mindset to you, who's a danger to your self interest. But if you're going to go punish somebody and then stay in their country for a certain period of time, to me, you either have one or two options. You crush that resistance so bad that you break the spine so that it can no longer come back at you, or you just don't do it. And the
mhm,
problem with what I feel like the American military was doing in the beginning was that it was like it's like a shotgun. Shotgun from far away. It doesn't have a very good accuracy, so it just kind of spreads everywhere. It kind of goes a little bit everywhere. There was like reports of people who weren't even involved in the Taliban or even support for them, but it was literally just because of ignorance on certain American soldiers' part, and they just were treated as if they were Taliban for whatever. You just storm into their house, you don't even pay attention to the local customs. You see their women and whatnot, and maybe you drag the man out in front of his wife and whatnot, and the guy has no ties to the Taliban. And there were so many instances of this, and that
mhm.
naturally just, I think, started things off on the wrong foot and left a bad taste in a lot of Afghans. Because what you have to remember is that, forget about, like, one thing that people need to realize is that even before July 2021, the Taliban still controlled a decent portion of the entire country. Like, it would probably be a figure around 25, 30, 33, 40% of the country in 2019, in 2020,
Mhm.
because not all of Afghanistan is cities and urban towns and whatnot, in the
So,
villages, you
something
know?
that we have to mention here is that in 2014, the U.S. officially handed off control of the war to the Afghan government, and
Hmm.
ever since then, the Taliban has been gaining ground. In 2014, they were marginal. There was actually more ISIS troops than there were Al Qaeda or Taliban, um, and um, that completely changed from 2014 onward. And the Taliban has been making steady progress ever since then. And the U.S. has only been operating in an advisory capacity,
Yeah.
which is part of why we've seen this steady change in the war to the Taliban gaining so much ground. And
Hmm.
something I will also say, that just like we were talking about in terms of it's really the failure of the politicians that led to this dramatic sweep of the Taliban just recently. But
Hmm.
it's the same thing in terms of how the war was started. It's really
Hmm.
the failure of politicians, especially George Bush,
Hmm.
because you know we were rightfully angry, after 9/11.
100%. Yeah.
That that was a very traumatic event for anyone who was alive at that point. And we had to do something, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If he had uh, turned to just dollar diplomacy and funding the Northern Alliance, and that's it,
Hmm.
um, that he'd be facing impeachment. That would be absolutely unacceptable to Americans. So you have to deal with public opinion as a president, but also once the war is started, nobody's really paying attention to like the way that he's setting up. Like he started the PRT program, for instance, in 2005, and you can't really go from revenge to hearts and minds, and
because that bad taste is already there.
Yeah, and once you already have that, and it's not like the revenge motive ever went away. I mean, Biden just this week was talking about how we should have never been nation building. It was never truly about it. It was purely for revenge. We've had our pound of flesh. But it's still hard to, especially as somebody who literally fought for that, has fought many times specifically to protect the PRT, and that is like, well, that's why I was there. Like that was the point, was building this nation, and now we've just given up on it, and it's this gut-wrenching feeling, realizing that like, even though we were literally like sometimes there was kind of like this thing that every new PRT gets tested by the Taliban, that they essentially would always wait until there was new units, and like that day out the gate, they have some major, I guess we'd call it a skirmish. The term was troops in contact, or TIC. And the rule was you had to stick it out. You had to sit there and duke it out. Otherwise, they'll hit you constantly the entire time. But there was also this kind of like unwritten, like kind of, I guess you could say, unwritten agreement that if there were any like, if we were meeting with dignitaries, if there were children about or anything like that, we knew that we'd never have to worry about contact. They, when we were attacked, it was always like on the road somewhere. They'd hit us in a valley where there's nobody there, or if there is somebody there, they're probably friendly. I remember having one guy pop out from a corner, or from his, what was, I'm guessing was his own house, pop out and hit our truck with an AK. He didn't last very long, but he only, it's an armored truck, did nothing, got a few bullets in the tires, and that was really annoying to replace. But I'm pretty sure he was coming out of his own house, and that's like one of the few times that we really were like around people. Otherwise it was in the valleys or on the road, and while they would often use places to shoot from, they would never shoot at us if we were around people. And that was partially because they, Taliban ain't dumb. They knew that we were PRT, and that means that we're there to provide roads, power, infrastructure. And that's infrastructure they want too, right? So they're going to drain the U.S. of money and then take over the country anyways, which is exactly what they did.
I totally agree with that, but I would emphasize one very specific thing, which is you have to appreciate how important it is for the Taliban to win the hearts and minds. And ultimately, maybe this is just because I'm an armchair general or whatnot, and I don't have physical fighting experience or whatnot. But for me, like, that's where this war was won and lost. This war, the Taliban's existence and the sustenance of their existence depended upon how much people wanted to support them in villages. I'm talking on very banal level of the Talibs being provided with just a little bit of bread by this village that they stop over. The Talibs being provided with a bed and some clean water in this village, because that village, say ascribed to what the Talibs were about. And I think that's the really important thing to bear in mind, even with what's happening right now in Afghanistan, is that I know this sounds uncomfortable to hear, but a lot of people in Afghanistan, obviously, they literally like the Taliban.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And here's the crazy thing. This is the thing that people should really think about, which is they think about how bad the Afghan national government had to be for them to go, you know what, the Taliban, I like them. They're a better alternative than the government.
Well, I
Because a lot of
mean,
the things that the Taliban do
that's
that
what
people hear about,
that's how they got powerful in the first place back in the 90s.
right?
They started off in Kandahar with literally just trucks and PKMs. Like they were what we call technicals. Basically a pickup truck with a machine gun mounted on the back. That's how they started, and that's really how they took over most of the country. It wasn't with tanks, it wasn't with helicopters, it wasn't with any of that kind of stuff. It was mostly just Toyota Hiluxes, to be specific, and PKMs, the type of Russian machine gun. And that's how they managed to take over most of Afghanistan by 2001. I mean, if
they didn't even take over 2000, it was just it was from 94 to 96 they took over most of the country, and then they ruled.
Yeah. Well, there was the Northern Alliance, of course, but that
was like tiny. That's like just in the northeast.
Well, it was pretty. Bit. It was pretty big from 97 all the way until 2000, but they were losing ground quite steadily. And funny thing is, only I think it's within 48 hours of the first plane hitting the Twin Towers. Oh, I just missed a super chat. Within 48 hours of that, less than 48 hours prior to that, they took out the main commander of the Northern Alliance, which was I can't remember the lion. Say again.
Ahmad Shah Massoud.
Oh yeah, Massoud. Yeah.
Yeah,
you say that a lot more fluently than me.
Ahmad Shah Massoud. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, the Lion of Panjshir, I think was his nickname, right?
Yeah.
And they managed to Al Qaeda assassinated him within 48 hours of the first plane hitting. If they had
no, it was no. It was 2 days before, not 2 days after. Let me just double check. I think it was September.
Yeah, it was 2 days before. Yeah.
Yes, man. Oh, you mean 48 hours before? Sorry, yeah.
Yeah. So if they hadn't done 9/11.
Yeah.
If they hadn't done 9/11, they would have taken over the last little bit of Afghanistan that was left. Yeah. And the funny thing is, there is resistance. We are already seeing some resistance forming. Yeah. I remember seeing all that stuff with the protests that just happened in wow, I have been there a million times. Jalalabad. There we go. Yeah. Jalalabad was our closest Air Force base, so we had to travel down there to get supplies and that kind of thing all the time.
J-Bad.
Yeah. Yeah. The only we hardly ever got those were pretty rote trips. You just go down in California, then route California, get there. But there was one time we had to get diverted, and we came pretty close to the Khyber, and that was weird because
why?
This was right when there were troubles between the Pakistan and the border crossings and all that kind of stuff. Because we bombed a couple of places in Pakistan, and so they were kind of threatening. So there was a possibility we would have actually ended up having to man the Khyber.
Damn.
But otherwise they were pretty peaceful trips, and Jalalabad was actually a really modern city. Asadabad was to be frank pretty backwards. Women were always in burqas. There was people literally like had gun shops on the corner and stuff like that. But in Jalalabad, you got the hookah shops are not next to the gun shops. The hookah shops are just cafes and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Pretty modern city. The women aren't fully covered all the time. They're going around with the hijab and stuff like that, and there's traffic. There's like people who are doing regular work. And Asadabad,
Jalalabad is definitely one of the major cities in the country.
Yeah.
So yeah, that makes sense.
I think it's the third largest, if I remember correctly, because it goes Kabul, Kandahar, and then Jalalabad. And then
sense.
I think Mazar-e Sharif is the next one, then Asadabad.
No, I think you're missing Herat in there. Herat is huge. In the west near Iran.
Yeah, I don't know how big that one is.
I would say that's definitely bigger than Mazar-e Sharif.
I think so.
Mazar-e Sharif is small. Yeah. I think.
I mean, I've never been up in that part of the country. That's way up north. You haven't seen what I look like. I'm on videos all the time. Well, at least we sound younger than we are.
Yeah, that's promising. Don't I look younger than I sound? Why can't I get that?
I mean, I had when I was a substitute teacher for a while, I actually had a hall monitor try to stop me from going into the teacher's lounge because it was thought that I was a student.
Oh wow!
It's like
that's a compliment.
This was when I was like 25, so I'm 32.
Okay. I'm guessing you didn't have your beard or anything.
Oh no, I had a beard. This was actually when I got out of the military. I specifically didn't shave for 2 years because there's this weird time which is called inactive ready reserve, and during that period I didn't shave. I'd trim it, but I'd never shaved, and also I have literally never shaved this part right here.
Okay.
Never. I haven't shaved it since 2011.
Wow.
Cut it definitely, but I mean otherwise my beard would be down to here. But like, yeah.
Dude, you'd look like some old school Confederate or something. if you had a beard like up to here.
Yeah. This is already getting too long. If I can put it in my mouth, that's too long because I ride a motorcycle and a Jeep, and a Jeep without doors, which means wind tends to do this. But to get back on topic, well, actually, this is a good question. Was the U.S. through its rebuilding project actually trying to make Afghanistan independent, or was it trying to make it dependent? If the latter,
that's a pretty good question.
If the latter is spelled with 2 T's, by the way, would you say that's the reason it buckled so quickly? Well, I think we hit on the main reason why it buckled so quickly was corruption in government. Like,
I don't think it was the Americans. I think the Americans came with pretty good intentions. If you skip the first few years and you take the revenge part out of it, I think there was definitely a genuine interest to try to make Afghanistan stand on its own 2 feet. And so that, not just from like the goodness of your own heart, I'm sure that was a part of it, but in politics that doesn't really feature that much, just so that you're not a burden on us, so that you can fend for yourself in everything. But so I don't think it was the Americans necessarily.
Yeah, but I do think it was partially because we explained how the PRTs were probably fostering corruption quite a bit, and that's corruption is a rot at the core of a republic. If you let it fester, it will destroy the republic.
Dude, like if you hear some of these videos, because like I can speak Pashto, right? And a lot of the Talibs, they speak Pashto. A lot of these videos coming out that you can see on Twitter and Google and whatnot, the first thing they always talk about is corruption is going to be gone. There's 2 things they talk about. Corruption is going to be gone, and there will be security here. So that kind of tells you, like,
that was their main selling point. their main selling point in 1994.
Exactly. And that's why when they first came, by the way, when they first came, people loved them in 96. Obviously, like a year later, when people realize, oh, these guys don't know what to do with an economy and there's this thing called hyperinflation and blah, 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 that's when, trouble happened. But when the Taliban first came, people, I'm not saying everybody, I'm sure there was people that didn't like them, but a lot of people loved them.
And as this question is kind of hinting at, and what we can learn from the history of the Taliban when they did take over, it took them a long time, because there's those famous, like, turning the soccer stadiums into mass execution, basically bloody playgrounds, and that is really late 90s. You didn't really see that at the beginning of the Taliban. That's that kind of horrific injustice. Although that was they have this really weird interpretation of Sharia law. Like, I was just watching something where I think it was a Vice News reporter was watching a Taliban hearing, like, going on in Kabul right now, and it was like somebody who had stolen a sheep or something like that. And literally the Taliban commander is sitting there recording it with his cell phone, right? Like, this is how he's just sitting there, holding a court proceeding and recording it on his phone. And his court proceeding was basically, you did it? Yes? All right, we're going to cut off your hand. And, and it's just kind of like, and even the reporter's kind of going like, wait, seriously? You're actually going to cut off his hand? It's like, well, that's what the Quran says. And he was just very forceful, like, this is what the Quran says. That weird interpretation is kind of core to the Taliban. That's why they're talking about security and end of corruption. They are very religious and very they're very beholden to their particular interpretation. And that's literally where the Taliban got started, because Taliban in Pashto just means students, and it was students of a mullah, as in, a religious school. So that's literally what the Taliban is. And it's core to their function. And but they're going to wait a while. They're going to talk all this big game of women's rights, and, oh, we're not going to have mass executions. We're not your daddy's Taliban. But every time I hear that, it reminds me of this. Like, every time I hear somebody like a Klansman saying, "Oh, we're not your granddaddy's clan," it's like, yes, you are. And this is going to have ramifications, but it's going to take a while. And in the meantime, they are going to squash basically all corruption. They're really good at that.
But that's going to make people love them. So then that begs a very interesting question, is like, okay, from the outside, you can analyze it in this way where it's kind of critical and super negative of the Taliban. But then what do you do if, like, Afghans turn around and go, hey, you know that rule about your hands being cut off when you steal? Because of the way I've been traumatized by the events of the last 43 years of just constant warfare in Afghanistan, I actually like that, and I want that.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what you're going to get, because humans act in predictable patterns, is you will get a bunch of, very shocking videos, probably in pretty good quality, pop up on Twitter at the beginning. But I guarantee you, those people who were thinking about stealing and looting before they saw those videos, they're probably going to think twice or 3 or 4 times about that. And because I have seen videos come out from this current news cycle, the last 2 weeks, where certain people from a city, like I saw one in Kandahar and one in Herat, they were accused of being looters. They're just they're probably super desperate themselves, but they're trying to take advantage of the situation by looting and stealing, right? You know what that entails. But they would get captured by the Talibs, and they got taken to essentially like a stadium, and the people in the stadium, I think they're like whipping them or something, and they paint their face black. People in the stadium, they're like cheering.
Cheering, yeah.
So then an interesting question comes up is like, okay, to you, you look at this and you go, that's not to my palate. I don't like that. That's way too militant, whatever. To them, they're saying, listen, this is way better than the option I've had for the last 43 years, where it's just the strong eats the weak. And there's a sense of justice, even if it sounds super flippant brutal, but there is a sense of justice. So I
Yeah.
think the international community has really important questions that it needs to answer for itself. Not that, like, I know I sound like a politician now, but because here's the thing, Cypher, like, I always thought to myself for like more than a decade, even when I can't remember how long I've thought to myself about this, but I just think to myself, and it would be interesting to see what you think about this because you're an American. But I always think to myself that, like, if I was an American, I would be furious at my government for spending $2 trillion abroad. Forget about like if your heart's in it or your heart's not in it. It's $2 trillion. Like
Hmm.
if I live in Detroit and there's gentrification happening, Afghans, I love you, but I want to focus on Detroit. Why are you spending 2 trillion outside of the country? Why do you need to spend 2 trillion for? Like there was a report done by the United Nations when the Taliban government first fell in 2002 that said Afghanistan needs $25 billion back then in 2002, whatever, 50 billion, 70 billion today, to go back to pre-war Afghanistan, to go to 1978 Afghanistan. They ended up spending what I don't even know the maths, like 100 times or 1,000 times that, and they
Hmm.
still didn't achieve that.
Yeah.
So if I was an American and I'm seeing my politicians make money off this, and like Dick Cheney is on the whatever the board of executives of Lockheed Martin, and they're getting awarded $600 million, defense contract. As an American, I would be, oh my, that would be furious.
You'll find that a lot of Americans are. I mean, especially, and here's another thing that we need to talk about is the expansion of this war. The fact that it's not just Afghanistan. It is a
Mm,
global war on terror. Um,
right.
I have my Afghan service ribbon and my GWAT, what it's called, the GWAT, the Global War on Terror. And I have both of those ribbons, and the I only fought in Afghanistan, but more Americans fought in Iraq. In fact, I have the casualty numbers over here, and this is where it gets particularly important because while the Afghanistan war has had lots of people died, so for instance, 70,000 friendlies, 2,500 Americans, 3,600 coalition overall, 4,000 contractors on top of that, which are mostly
Mm,
Americans,
yeah, yeah.
um, and 48,000 civilians have been killed in Afghanistan, on top of 52,000 enemy troops. So, while more than 100,000 people have lost their lives in this war, it's about 150,000
Roughly.
just in Afghanistan over the last 20 years. 150,000 where an entire war, entire country is engulfed in war, is actually pretty low, especially how big. For those who don't know, Afghanistan is roughly the size of Texas, and the so it's a big country. It's got way more people than Texas, and you're only talking 150,000 people. That's
Yeah.
not that's high, but then you look at the entire global war on terror, and then you're looking at 800,000 people dead, and
Mm,
about 37 million people displaced, and it's about to go way higher in the next coming weeks from that. Um, and yet the U.S. has only lost 10,000 people in the entire global war on terror, and that includes 9/11, where 3,000 Americans died in one day.
yeah.
So literally 30% of the fatalities of this entire war for the American side was the start of the war. Um, Although there is 7,600 contractors who've died, and those are mostly U.S., but they don't figure into our stuff since they're. I actually don't really like the term contractor. It's obfuscating the fact that they're mercenaries. That's what they really are.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think
and
that's reflected in the fact that, you just said oh, 3,000 American servicemen, or 2.5, I think it was, died in Afghanistan. When
Yeah,
they're
two and a
like,
half
when
with
the contractors,
4,000
if they were
contractors.
American, you would count them, but it's obviously because they're mercenaries and whatnot.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're technically not fighting for the United States. They are fighting for money.
right.
They are contractors. It's literally in the name. So it's an obfuscation of the fact that they're just mercenaries. Um, the U.S. never signed the UN anti-mercenary thing back in the 80s, so we
Mm,
might be trying to obfuscate the fact that it's that these are mercenaries. That's not. The UN has had repeated attempts to try to label them as mercenaries and therefore not be able to be employed by, countries that have signed that. For instance, Britain. Um, and since Britain is involved in Afghanistan, you know, Britain and Australia and Canada make up a significant amount of the other coalition fatalities, which is
mm,
an additional 1,100. Um, if I were to hazard a guess, and it's a guess, I would say about 80% of that is Britain or former British colonies. Um, the um, but the worst war was Iraq, and the Iraq War from 2003 to 2010 um, had more than 100,000 civilians killed,
yeah,
between 31 and 37,000 enemy, um, 4,800 coalition with an additional 3,600 contractors, and 17,700 friendlies killed. Way more deadly.
yeah.
Um, and this is while we don't need to get into the causation of the Iraq War because it's messy and fraught with disinformation. Um, the fact is, the main motivation was
Mm,
terrorism. Um, because the whole idea with the whole WMDs and the weapons of mass destruction and all that kind of stuff
mhm,
was the fear that Saddam Hussein would use that on us.
mm,
That was the constant fear mongering that they were doing. And that he had supposed ties to Al Qaeda and stuff like that. He didn't. It's, all of this is disinformation, but um, it was ultimately part of the global war on terror. All the stuff that we're doing in Syria right now, all the stuff that all the bombings in Yemen and in oh shoot, what's the country just east of Yemen? It's like Qatar,
uh, Oman, maybe.
Oman, yeah. In
Okay.
Yemen and Oman, the bombings in Kenya, the strike forces that have constantly been in Somalia, like we're all over the place. This is the end of the Afghanistan war is not the end of the global war on terror.
Yeah,
It is a significant drawdown, but it's not the end. Um, Syria, we've got something like 3,000 troops there right now.
yeah,
Um, the and of course, all those people who are now afraid of just a clear sky, um,
yeah.
because drones might rain bombs down.
Mhm.
This is something that has spread well beyond the borders of Afghanistan, and cost 800,000 lives and 37 million people displaced.
Yeah,
So it's it's a I wanted to go through those statistics just to kind of put in this
conceptualize
perspective.
it.
Yeah, put in this
Yeah,
perspective the true human cost of this. 3,000 Americans dying was the start of all of this.
mm,
Now we have 800,000 people dead worldwide.
yeah.
There, this is
There's a
not a
huge
fair
discrepancy.
trade-off.
And the
Eh,
thing is, like, again, if I was to if I was to approach this from like a whatever, like a geopolitical perspective, again, I would go back to what I said like 10 minutes ago. I would be furious if I'm an American citizen because, so I mentioned I'd be furious because of all the money being spent that could have been spent on me, etc. But I would also be furious at just the ineptitude with which the greatest superpower that the world has probably ever seen, the
Mhm.
people, the bureaucrats, the officials, the administrators responsible for high level decision making at the top, the poor decisions they made, like oh, we're going into Iraq because there's WMDs there. You go in there and there's no WMDs. Dude, why didn't you know there was WMDs here? You have
Well,
hundreds of trillions of dollars at your
there's some
disposal.
there's some argument to be made that it was intentionally that the evidence of WMDs was intentionally overstated. That's why I say disinformation rather than misinformation.
But here's the
Um,
thing. My point is, Safa, is that okay, even if that's fair enough. Okay, I'll give you that. But things can't be given to you on a plate. Do more research. Put more money into
yeah,
intel.
but
Find somebody who's in charge of this supposed WMD
yeah,
division of the Iraqi
well,
government and talk to them.
the UN inspectors have been getting pushed out quite a bit, and that's actually what prompted the whole thing in the first place. But also, you got to remember this is kind of a separate war, even though it's technically part of the global war on terror. It is also separate because we had been imposing a no-fly zone over Iraq. Um, we had
Yeah,
intervened in Iraq a number of times in between
the Gulf
1991 and
War a
well,
decade
not
ago.
just
Yeah,
but in between the Gulf War
yeah,
and the
yeah, yeah,
Iraq
yeah,
War.
yeah. The no-fly
Uh,
zones. Yeah,
not just the no-fly zones. We invaded twice. We sent small expeditions into the north into what is basically Kurdistan, and um, we cruise missiled Iraq something like once a year.
yeah.
Like Clinton loved cruise missiling people, but he was actually actively campaigning in 1998 to basically declare war on Iraq. A lot of people don't remember that, but like
Hmm.
Clinton was very pro military intervention into Iraq, although as the news constantly like to point out, it was kind of a distraction from local politics with
Monica Lewinsky.
yeah. That's right when all of that was going on, and then suddenly he's
I
like,
did
no, no,
not
no,
have relations
we
with
need to
that
go to
woman.
war. Why are you going after me?
Exactly. But see, again, this is like I don't mean to sound like a revolutionary or something, but I would if I'm an American taxpayer, and I'm expected to pay taxes, and I know that my officials are making decisions of this quality, like even here in Britain, I see the politicians doing like three 180s on COVID, like lockdown, no lockdown, vaccine, no vaccine, second shot, third shot, whatever, all of this. Me, as somebody who's like a taxpayer, sees this, I lose confidence in the people who are supposed to be guiding our society. It's like, how do you make such inept decisions? Like, your job is to make good decisions.
Yeah.
Do your
Well,
job.
I think ineptitude is the one thing that is truly human nature. Um,
Yeah, it's true. But I don't like that. That feels like a bit of a cop out. You can't do that. You can't do that. You're a
yeah,
politician. You're responsible for this.
but you also have to understand when it comes to something like Iraq, um, it was not just ineptitude; it was the sheer push of American will. The people wanted more. They wanted to go after terrorism everywhere. They wanted it
Yeah,
to be a war on terror, not the war in Afghanistan. And so that push fed right
facilitated
into
that.
all the anti-Iraq feelings that had already been going on. Iraq had been like our main adversary throughout the 90s. Um,
Yeah.
so it was kind of a natural thing, but ultimately, there were no WMDs. Funny thing about that, there was mustard gas. People seem to forget that, but we did find significant quantities of mustard gas. But mustard
But
gas is
we knew that
barely even
mustard
a
gas.
double.
But
Well,
we knew
no,
that had been used against Kurds like 15 years before, like Halabia,
well, he
or
was supposed to
14.
have
Okay.
gotten rid of it. That's why there were UN inspectors and everything. There was
Right.
an entire process. He was and this was absolutely by threat of military intervention. That was the agreement made back in 1991, and yet, he was kind of pushing against inspectors and that kind of thing. That's why I remember seeing it plastered all over the place. It was like, well, now we're sending the real inspectors, and it shows a bunch of Marines. Well, they found what?
They inspected the hell out of that place.
and at what cost? Now, something, when we're talking about like government corruption and motivation and ineptitude in decision making, something that we really need to hit on here, and we should have probably started off with, was that there are some common myths surrounding the not only the war in Afghanistan, but also the war in Iraq, and the global war on terror. Or as Bush puts it, global war on terror. But terror. He's a Texan. But there's this common perception. I've seen people say that like the war in Afghanistan is for oil, which
Afghanistan doesn't have oil though, does it? Not that I know.
They actually did discover oil in 2014, which is funny enough the exact year that we drew down. So all this talk about like it's a war for oil is like, well, then why would we draw down the second we find oil there?
No, I think Afghanistan doesn't have oil. It's got lithium, right? Apparently, it's
there are rare earth metals. Yeah, it's really they're really hard to get at, and basically there's no reason to like. Anybody who tries to say it's a war for resources doesn't understand Afghanistan in the slightest. It basically doesn't have resources. And what resources it has is really difficult to get at. Opium. Well, yeah, there's that. But the U.S. has actually been rather active in trying to make that less of a trade. Because opium has been
sustaining the Taliban.
Yeah. And we actually, one of the things that the PRT did was pay farmers to burn their fields. That was actually part of our mission. I remember actually like sitting there next to a field that was burning and like, that smoke's. Well, I'm going to have a fun day tonight.
I'll tell you what, man, the PRTs did so much good for Afghanistan. Like, it literally changed the outlook. Like, Cypher, when I was in Afghanistan in 1999, it was just like, something. I don't want to get too dramatic because a lot of these like books and movies have done that with Afghanistan, and I'm not a big fan of that. But like huge parts of it was like a legit war-torn country where you didn't look in any direction and didn't realize, oh, a war happened here very recently. But like when I went back in 2013 or what, there was like paved roads. Everybody had phones. A bunch of people had the internet, and like everybody basically had cars.
Yeah, and also that was because of, well, I don't know about cars, but definitely the roads were basically because of the PRTs.
And obviously the cars were there because of American aid money just trickling down into ordinary people. And by the way, I'm talking about villages up in the mountain. I'm not talking about towns.
I was there in 2010,
really cool.
I was there in 2010, and the places where the only way a car is even getting up there is going down like a bunch of switchbacks. And people have it. Cars parked right next to their house, and it's like we had to walk up here. How the heck did you get this thing up here?
Yeah.
And there was just this ridiculous amount of American capital flowing in there.
Crazy amounts.
So especially this whole idea of like, some people have even said that it was a war for opium. Like, no, it's basically a war against. But any kind of statement of, oh, this was a war for X, is absolutely contradicted by the sheer amount of treasure spent on this war.
It's crazy.
But there's also related to that is there's also a prolific misconception that the U.S. monetarily supported the Taliban itself. And
Yeah.
I
Do
remember
people
in
actually think that? That's
oh
I don't
yeah,
know.
I actually said something like this. The silly people who think this. And somebody literally in the replies was like, "You're wrong." And it's like,
Is it because they're conflating the Taliban with the Mujahideen of the 80s?
yeah, like
Okay.
there's kind of like this meme going around of because there's Rambo 3. Have you ever seen that movie?
Of course, yeah, yeah.
Right at the end it says like we thank the brave fighters of the Mujahideen,
Yeah.
which fighters of the Mujahideen is a bit of a redundant.
Yeah.
Like Mujahideen literally means holy warrior.
Yeah.
But like the um people are making fun of that, like, haha, they turned into the Taliban. It's like, well, yes and no. Um, or that they turned in Al Qaeda, and it's like, well,
No, but they
yes and
it's
no.
not even. Oh, with Al Qaeda, you can kind of go yes or no, but with them, you can't even go yes because when they came, their specific objective was to get rid of the people you gave money to who fought
Yeah,
for your own strategic goals, but they had their own goals, obviously, as
yeah,
well. You know what I mean? The
yeah.
Taliban got rid of
Especially,
the Mujahideen.
especially well, it's also weird because, like, for instance, our biggest ally in 2001 during the initial invasion in October of 2001 was Dostum, and
Right.
Dostum was a communist.
No, but he's
Um,
a weirdo because he's famous for switching. Like, so he was with
yeah,
the communists at first, then in like '92, beginning early '92 or whatnot, he switched to the Mujahideen, and then when there was a civil war, he made
yeah,
a pact with one against the other, and then he
but
joined the other,
while
etc.
while we were supporting the Mujahideen, he was fighting them.
Yeah,
Because we stopped all aid in '89. Um, and
that's not actually true. Is it like the more aid was given? It was cut significantly, but a decent chunk was given all the way to '92. Most if
'92.
not most, if not all of it, was not military. It was like civilian, so for like
Oh yeah, no, we
orphans
were.
and
All of it was technically not military because the
yeah,
way
like
we were doing it was funneling it through Pakistan.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. But even after that, it changed almost completely to just widows and orphans. Sorry, and pardon me, but it was still a decent chunk.
the but there's also because one of the Mujahideen, um, kind of one of the main financiers was Osama bin Laden himself. And since we were funneling money through Pakistan, the CIA really likes to push the thing of like, no, we did not, because foreign fighters were known as Arab Mujahideen.
Hmm.
And so Osama bin Laden would be called an Arab Mujahideen. And the CIA repeatedly states that they did not fund Arab Mujahideen, only natives. Um,
But that's silly. That doesn't make sense. They gave money to one pool, and then that pool distributed it. How do you know where it
exactly,
went?
exactly, and especially considering, Osama bin Laden wasn't a fighter; he was a financier. Like that was his
Yeah,
entire work was financing everything. So how the heck did he not get a hold of any of this money? But
yeah,
you will also see people trying to say that, it's Reagan's fault. Like, look, here's a picture of Reagan with a bunch of mujahideen. And it's like, well, a bunch of those people I recognize because those were very anti-Taliban folks.
mm,
Um, and you're trying to say that this is the people who ended up, biting us.
9/11.
Yeah. And no, not at all. To conflate the Mujahideen with the Taliban or Al Qaeda, or I've even seen people conflate it with ISIS, which it's in the name, Iraq and Syria.
Yeah,
Like, pretty sure that's not Afghanistan. Last time I checked. But
that's
although
a
I,
really poor common myth. Like you just need to go on Google for 5 minutes. That's not. I feel like that's not even worth talking. Like we should talk
yeah,
about other
it's just
common myths like
it is
graveyard of
so.
empires and stuff.
Oh yes, and that's the other one I really want to hit on. Um,
Yeah.
but like I see this myth pop up so often that it's really important to just smash it down before it
Oh
spreads
yeah, yeah, yeah.
too much.
Yeah, no, that's a good
It
point.
it really shouldn't be because kind of obvious. I mean, they're literally different words, but I think it's also there is probably a bit of racism built into this myth.
Why?
Basically,
What kind of racism?
oh, they're brown people with guns.
Oh,
They
okay,
all
okay,
look
okay.
the
Yeah,
same.
yeah. Right.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
there is a bit of racism built into that myth. But the last one that we really need to hit on is the whole graveyard of empires. Now there's no racism built into this, but but there is this common idea. I mean, I've seen it in the comments already that somebody was talking about the graveyard of empires and that. And there's
Right.
only one empire I can think of that actually ended in Afghanistan, and it ended in 1989. Um, that
Soviets?
the Soviets, yeah, they fell apart immediately, right? Um,
Yeah.
but like people will also like to point out Alexander the Great, but where his he managed to cross the Indus River. The Indus River is in Pakistan.
Yeah.
You know,
One
they
of his
just
generals, when he died and his empire was divided between his diadochis, the four,
yeah the
Seleucid
Bactria.
said the main one. Yeah, Seleucid said the main one. His Bactria, which is basically northern Afghanistan, like Mazar-e Sharif and Balkh, that was part of his realm. And then
Mhm.
the Greeks that left, that stayed there, kind of merged with the locals there as well. They set up their own kingdoms going into the 2nd century AD, like 400 years after Alexander.
Yeah,
So that's a myth.
the
But the thing
Seleucids
is,
fell apart before the Bactrian Empire fell apart, right?
yeah, that's what I'm saying. But what I mean is, if you just take all the Greeks who created a polity in Afghanistan, it would take you to the 2nd century AD.
Yeah.
The Seleucids fell apart, I think, somewhere in like the beginning of the 2nd century BC or the end of it. I don't know how the BC thing works. Um, but yeah, but
Um,
with the thing with this kind of a
I
myth,
I like to
Cypher,
say
you
that
got
BC. I like to say that BC stands for backwards counting.
backwards count. Okay, I think it was like 130-ish BC. I don't know if that's the
So,
beginning or the end. I think
uh,
that's the end.
so if you say early BC, that would be like early first century BC. That would be like, um, you know, 200. I mean, 20 BC rather than 90 BC.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So it was like, yeah, towards the end. But these kind of myths, they're just built into nation building. Every country has this, and
Yeah,
I obviously, like, as a historian, I can see it, and I'm like, dude, the Greeks stayed here for 400 years after Alexander. The Mongols destroyed this area.
and
The
and
Mughals came, a
the
bunch of
Mughal,
people.
yeah, the Mughals were effectively housed there. Like they just went right through. Um,
Yeah. So,
like
but these kind of myths are very important, and I'm sure America has tons of these myths
oh yeah,
in the late 18th century and early
uh,
19th century. The push
our
westward,
our main one is called
manifest.
the frontier myth. Um,
Oh yeah, manifest destiny and frontier myth and all that stuff. You
mhm.
put it together, yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's the key cornerstone of American exceptionalism. Uh,
exactly. So this is just a way for Afghans to feel proud about themselves. I don't
yeah,
think it literally means this is where empires die, but I mean, we can't disagree with the notion that it's very tough to conquer and maintain political rule over that area.
yeah.
You
But
know what I mean?
as historians, we have to also,
Yeah.
recognize that yes, it's a foundational myth to the. Well, do you think that Afghanistan really has a nationalism? Like,
I think, but at this point, it definitely has, like, what you call it. So it's not as if the full figure has been fleshed out. Say like British English nationalism or French or even Americans. You guys have done a great job. But no, I'm saying of in terms of creating a national identity for yourself. Nationalism is a
yeah,
nasty word that gets thrown around.
I'll go.
But
I'll go
Afghanistan has
find
done a pretty good
my
job of that.
cowboy hat and start going yippee.
Yeah. But Afghanistan's done a pretty good job of that. That's one thing that would always annoy me when I would read like articles and I go, "Oh, people in Afghanistan, they have no notion of like patriotism. Each person is to their own clan." It's like, dude, are you talking about the 1830s? Like we're in 2000s,
Oh yeah,
2010s. A bunch of like think about the flags. There are people running around in Kabul and Jalalabad that are in danger of being shot by a Talib, of
and
taking down
they're
the new
carrying
flag,
the
the old
Republic
flag.
flag.
Like if you didn't care about patriotism, you wouldn't, put your life down like that.
Yeah.
So there definitely is some very decent amount of patriotism in Afghanistan.
Yeah. The thing that makes it different from like patriotism is just pride in one's country.
Right.
The main thing that makes something form of nationalism is that there's a kind of inclusion and exclusion, that you
The
have,
other.
yeah, that you have somebody some alien that you can deride
Yeah.
as not
You're
being
the
part of the nation.
opposite. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And therefore a nation is built by trying to include that inclusion. That's
But see, even that, right? I had a bunch of debates with people in my class when I was first year of PhD, with people like that. It's like, I don't want to say that that's a good thing, but I can see somebody's point if they said that's a necessary thing in the beginning
yeah.
of a nation building process. Like
Well,
Americans, are you telling me in 1770s and 1780s America cipher that the British were not seen as the British are
well,
tyrants, the
we
British are.
wouldn't really call that nationalism yet.
But
Really,
you're
in
you're
terms
you're
of
you're creating your own identity opposed to somebody's,
oh,
isn't it?
I mean, if you look at what was actually being said in Congress in the 1770s, they were very clearly saying, I have rights as an Englishman. They were asserting their rights as an English. Like they
I get
said
that, but
that
I'm saying
over and over and over
1780s.
again.
Once the
No,
revolution was over, I know
actually,
Thomas Jefferson wrote that letter to King
actually,
George, etc.
a lot of American historians think that real American nationalism was fully formed by the Civil War. That the
Oh,
Civil War is what made us a nation,
oh,
and that because you have to understand that it's about that inclusion and exclusion. So we were literally defining through the Civil War who was included and excluded. American
mm,
Indians were excluded, blacks were included.
mm,
Um, and that was fundamental to our nation building. When there's actually a great book, it's called Nation Among Nations. I can't remember. Well, I have the internet right here. Um, Nation Among Nations. Uh, it is written by Thomas Bender. Duh. Um,
okay,
so Thomas Bender's Nation Among Nations actually makes the argument that the Civil War was fundamentally fought to define what the nation was. That was the core thing being fought over. Would we be a nation that allows slavery? Would we be a nation that you know oppresses its own people? Would we be a nation that allows um, its core states to just leave whenever they feel like it?
right,
Um, that was fundamental. We were building. We were not just a union anymore. We were a nation,
mm.
and that is what I'm getting at with Afghanistan. Is can you really say that they have that yet? Where
Uh,
like are they
it's
fighting to define what Afghanistan is, or are they fighting for like their tribe, or are they fighting for
See, this
their
is the thing.
region?
Cypher, listen, yeah. You see, that's such a pertinent question, and you just have to dumb it down x10. It's none of that. All it is the majority of Afghans, what they want is to be able to live a life where they don't feel like they're under a state of war. Now, that is a
Mhm.
very generic and blanket statement I'm throwing out there. There are people, for instance, the Hazara ethnicity, who feel hard done by the way that they've been treated at certain points of their history, especially by the Taliban in the 90s. Certain massacres happened here, certain massacres happened there. So they have some of their own concerns. But when you have a country that's been going through a war for more than 4 decades, the number one concern
Safety.
across the board is just security. It's just so that, like right now, I'm not thinking about the safety of my sister. It's not because I don't like her, because like I know she's like more or less safe. Like crazy things can happen to anybody at any time. But if I'm a dude in Afghanistan in a war zone in general, and I'm not with, say, like just any women in my house or whatnot, or young children, like it's always going to pop up in your head. It's like, oh, okay, I hope they're okay. Like, did I leave them with somebody that could protect them? Like, that sounds like a very small, minute almost like meaningless, superficial detail. But that's the kind of things they think
But
about. They don't think
it's
about
fundamental to human life, you know, it's
exactly.
safety.
So that's my point, is that you see these other like amazing words. Like I studied the American Revolution. It's one of my favorite topics in all of history, no less mainly because there were
Oh,
so many incredible figures in that
so
time period. But
so
go on,
I
sorry.
the and you're right to look at it from that perspective. I mean, like, and we should also talk about historical parallels because this is kind of perfect for that.
So,
When we were fighting Vietnam,
mm,
we had this view of, you know, protecting South Vietnam, keeping keeping the commies away, and protecting democracy, and they viewed it a very different way. They viewed it as
mm.
a civil war, and
Yeah, yeah,
that like Americans were just interrupted. Um,
yeah,
and
and yeah. Go on, sorry.
like there is a lot of parallels between Vietnam and Afghanistan, especially in terms of just how long this war has gone on. Now, in terms of troops, the way it was fought,
Yeah,
completely different. I mean,
mm,
we never got past 100,000. Vietnam had nearly 600,000 troops at its height. Um,
yeah.
and Vietnam is also a lot smaller than Afghanistan. Um, well, South Vietnam is. I wouldn't know if what the
I think
inclusion
the
of.
population of Vietnam is like almost 3 times as much, if I'm not mistaken. I
Whoa.
think yeah, well, let me just double check. I have Google. Yeah,
Uh,
it's 96 million, 96.5 million. They
huh.
got a bunch of people,
Yeah. Well,
and that's from
also
2 years ago.
Afghanistan has a lot of mountains. You know,
Yeah, and a lot
there's
of land, you
mountains in
can't do
Vietnam,
anything.
but it's a lot of marsh and jungle and whatnot.
Yeah.
But um, something we didn't learn in Vietnam, and we didn't, and once again we didn't learn again, is there's only one real way to win a war like this, and it is not nice. Um, and we were
Yeah.
talking about earlier is that whole, you know, breaking the back of the resistance. We did this effectively in the Philippines, but in the worst way
Mm.
possible.
Yeah, yeah.
We
I heard.
You
I
can
haven't read
win,
too much, but I've read a bit.
yeah, because the word that we used at the time in 1899 to 1903 was concentration camps.
Mm.
The way that you win a guerrilla war for sure, against a enemy such as the Taliban, is concentration camps, and at no point do we want to engage in that. Um,
Yeah.
but
I
you
personally
concentrate the
like differ,
population, then you say that anything beyond this concentrated population is the enemy, kill them. So the funny
but
thing is, staying inside the concentration camp is actually good. It's the area outside of it that's that.
here's the thing, Safa. I would provide an alternative to that. I can definitely see where you're coming from, and I can see how that can be effective. But I would under no circumstances say that that's the only way, and I don't think that that's the best way either. By the way, I think a much better way is to, because this is the thing. Like I have to be careful how I say this because I don't want to come across disrespectful. But you got to remember, Safa, that every country has their own rules. Now let's lay some ground rules. Very important. I don't come to your country and tell you you got to do things like this, and you don't come to my country and tell me that. Also, there's some very common, let's call them human rights, that I would hope everybody would endeavor to have. But for the most part, you can't go to another place and tell them, yo, you need liberal democracy. It's like most Afghans don't know how to spell liberal democracy. Most Vietnamese people, they don't. What if most Vietnamese people wanted communism? Are you going to tell them, hey, you're wrong? It's like, yeah, but I think I'm right. No, you're wrong because I'm the strongest country in the world. It's like, that's not a good enough argument. Like, I'm going to fight you, I'm going to drain all your resources, and you're going to go home with a lot more money lost than you would have if you didn't come here in the first place. So for me, it's like, I'm just very disappointed, if I'm going to be completely honest with you, with the way American politicians have handled their country's affairs in terms of foreign policy. We could talk about domestic. No, we don't need to talk about domestic. That's tricky stuff.
That's a
But in
totally
terms
different
of
topic.
foreign affairs, I think it's been embarrassing. And I get it. Armchair general over here, I'm far away from it, so I don't feel the burn of it and the intensity. But looking at it, I'm like, dude, this is just like a bunch of kids pushing buttons. It's like, what are you doing? This isn't how you do things. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm angry, so I'm gonna act in a angry way. Like,
Well,
I don't even like it,
so
Cypher, when people say,
this is something fundamental to American foreign policy, and it has been for decades. And now now you get to hear my Wilson rant, because
go on.
this is fundamentally what is called Wilsonianism.
Yeah,
It is
yeah.
it is a foreign policy philosophy, and it is one that has ruled well, it kind of went down during the 20s and 30s, but since World War II, it has been the ruling philosophy in American foreign affairs ever since. And this interventionism, you'll hear often, which is literally a quote of Woodrow Wilson: "We're fighting for democracy. We're fighting. We're fighting to make the world safe for democracy." That's the quote. He said that in the 14-point speech in 1918.
Wilsonian democracy, yeah.
And that is fundamental to this. And the main opposition to this philosophy is what's called realism. This idea that states get to, what you were basically espousing was realism. Was this idea that states get to decide how they want to act. You should not operate by ideals. Let them be them and you be you.
You know what the funny thing about that is, Cypher, is I don't understand. I don't want to sound like a dictator here, but I don't understand why there's a discussion there. Like, the word is literally called realism. It comes from reality. Aren't you trying to grapple with reality?
So the term there is talking about, it's treating states as real, which one, they're not. It's a social construct.
Arbitrary lines in the sand.
They exist, but not in reality. It's just lines drawn in the sand. But they treat them as real objects. That the base unit of diplomacy is the nation state. Now, we were just talking about places like Afghanistan, especially in people like Wilson's view, would have viewed him as Afghanistan as not a nation, and therefore doesn't get treated as equal. And that is still part of realism.
But so there's problems. That's a very unintelligent take, though, dude. Like, what do you mean Afghanistan's not a real nation?
Yeah, but understand the workings of this. It's not about moral philosophy. This is diplomacy, and this is how best to organize foreign affairs for your country.
I get that, but I'm saying they were literally wrong in their assumption that Afghanistan is not a nation.
Realists haven't had power here since FDR.
That's the problem with America. I'm joking. Yeah.
Hold on, I didn't actually read this super comment. Hold on a second.
The need to explore.
So that is
liberalism and the Washington
free trade is definitely a part of neoliberalism in that, but it's not. Neoliberalism isn't a foreign policy. It's just a wish for more free trade. That's the main foreign policy, is this whole fight for democracy thing. It was our ruling philosophy throughout the Cold War. It's literally why we invaded Vietnam, was to prop up the democracy there. Battles of history. It really does all go back to Wilson and how he formulated that, and we have stuck by that core idea of fighting for democracy. And that is exactly why we tried to impose democracy, specifically liberal democracy, on Afghanistan. Now, they had a parliamentary system rather than our electoral system. But all that being said, although they had a president, rather than a prime minister, right?
Yeah.
I don't know offhand how the republic was organized then.
There was general elections that ordinary people would vote for a presidential candidate.
Yes, but in a parliamentary system, you do not vote for the president. It's a prime minister. You vote for the party.
Okay. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think, yeah.
So I guess they were a electoral system. Were being the operative term.
Mm.
And this, but this core idea of fighting for democracy corrupted even what was essentially a punitive expedition to start off with. And I think a lot of Americans are starting to kind of realize that this was ultimately a war for revenge. All these niceties and that were fluff.
Yeah.
And if we had treated it as such, if we had started pulling out in like 2011, which is when I think we really should have, we started pulling out in 2011, but but we should have pulled out fully. We shouldn't have just stayed there as advisors after 2014. That should have been it. And the reason being is the main person we were seeking revenge for, we killed in 2011.
Yeah.
So the entire purpose of the war was accomplished, and yet we stayed there. Because it had transformed into this nation building project. And at that the core of that nation building project was this Wilsonian interventionism.
I get that. But even then, man, I don't find that argument very convincing. I know, like, you're just trying to like explain it to me and whatnot. It's not. I don't know if this is necessarily what your opinion is or whatever. But it's like, do you think of what did you say?
It was just plain Wilson.
You know, I like that. Yeah, the guy was 100 years ahead of his time. Dude.
Yeah, Wilson's a bit of a meme on this channel.
Yeah, people are Kurds are super annoyed at him, right? Kurds.
Oh yeah, very much, because he refused to recognize them.
But Thingy likes them, right? Armenians, right? Armenians like him.
Armenians like him. Polish folks like him. Polish folks really like him. The like main street in their capital is named Wilson Strasse.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Mad. Okay.
They have like a big statue to him right there in the capital, and stuff. So like they're big fans of him because essentially they had been divided up. We're getting off track, but I'll go quick. They had been divided up during the 19th century between Germany and Russia since the Treaty of Versailles. I mean, not Versailles. The one that ended the Napoleonic Wars. And they had experienced incredible oppression during that time. In fact, at one point, Russia tried to say that they could only speak Russian in school.
Alexander III's Russification policies, right?
Yeah. Because they were still seen as a separate state. And Germany had their own things, and that split was actually core to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Compact in 1939.
39, yeah.
You'll still like, I see tankies on Twitter all the time who are trying to say like, no, Poland is rightfully Russia's. Like, what the hell? But Wilson restored Poland. So yeah, they're big fans of him. He tried to create what's called Wilsonian Armenia. Yeah. Well, Wilsonian Armenia is different from Armenia today. It would have included all of Armenia, because what Armenia today is essentially just Russian Armenia.
It's funny. There used to be a big one like near Cilicia.
But Ottoman Armenia is still in Turkey today.
Yeah.
And like there's a lot of, I mean, especially because of the genocide that happened there in 1915 to all the way until 1917. Wilson really wanted to help them. Also helps that they were white Christians. Because if you know anything about Wilson, you know that he was always racist.
Yeah, I heard about that. He was like a lawyer before he became president, right?
Yeah, well, what do you think that this whole fight for democracy thing it's rooted in? It's this idea that Western culture, what's it's that
white man's burden?
that like the white man's burden, the whole, like, there's a saying from Hitler that, like, basically is the same kind of, like, you know, well, you must preserve our people, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
It's called the 14 words, and
Right.
the and all of that stuff about, like, Western civilization. You're seeing it right now in American politics when you're seeing people talk about things being anti-white and stuff like that, and how Marxism is coming to take your children.
The white genocide in Europe. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, that a great replacement. All of that
Yeah.
is all rooted in this idea that, you know, Western civilization, and Western civilization is often code word, especially when we're talking about Woodrow Wilson, is coded white very clearly.
Yeah.
And especially with Woodrow Wilson, it was definitely coded white. That's why he was, you know, big to giving sovereignty to Poland and Armenia, but not Kurdistan, not China, not Vietnam, not any African country. You know, he talked a big game about decolonization and all that kind of stuff, and then what does he do? Decolonize Poland. Yeah. So oftentimes, and in fact, I'd argue more often than not, when people start talking about Western civilization, it's coded white, and that is core to this whole, you know, fighting for democracy thing. You know, we're imposing white civilization on those brown people in Afghanistan.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's not expressed as nakedly as that, but I think the spirit is kind of, with all due respect, I think it's kind of similar to that whole colonialism, imperialism time where we're coming to tell you how to govern yourselves. When it's like, dude, maybe I want somebody's hands to be cut off. You know, as messed up as that sounds.
Yeah.
Like, what do you do there? It's a legit philosophical quandary because, you know.
Because it's like, well, if you want to be truly democratic, then you have to let them, to borrow Wilson's words, you have to let them self-determine.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's actually a term that, well, he didn't come up with it, and in fact, one of his cabinet members got kind of annoyed for him claiming that he came up with it. But
self-determination. It's lumped in with Wilsonian democracy.
Yeah, well,
stuff.
Self-determination is what used to be termed popular sovereignty, but in American context, that got lumped in with decisions over slavery and that, so we don't really use that term anymore. But it is one of the things that, like, I'm sure there's probably going to be some people who are, like, really annoyed that I'm even talking about racism and Wilsonianism and stuff like that, and in something that was clearly not racially based, you know. Like, this is not essentially a racist war, even though it has those kinds of tendrils that are supporting it. But and this goes to Avatar Mike Phantom's question here. OEF meaning Operation Enduring Freedom. You know, that's the OEF lasted from 2001 to 2014 when it turned to the advisory thing. But you know, because I know a lot of people like Mike Phantom, Avatar Mike Phantom here, and I'm totally in this boat that I was crying last night. I was straight up crying. Especially when I found out that Johnny Five guy that I was talking about, you know, Johnny Five was always there, you know. And that got the tears flowing, you know. And then just, you know, when you get in that mood, you got to wallow in the misery. And so I'm watching, what's happening at the airport in Kabul and that kind of thing, and then seeing like how much the Taliban has gotten a hold of our weaponry, and that we had leased all this weaponry to the ANP and ANA, Afghan National Army and Afghan National Police.
Yeah.
And the ANA and ANP had all of this stuff that now the Taliban just has fleets of MRAPs and Humvees. They even have like drones, helicopters, fighter planes, though they are prop fighter planes. There's been some misreporting that they were jets. They're not jets. But like, they are going to have military supremacy there of the sort that they could have only dreamed of in the 90s.
So are you trying to say like bringing it back to Mike's question, like, do you sometimes think to yourself, like, what were we fighting for? Do you like question that?
And that's what I was getting at with going about this whole talking about all this, the really kind of brutally honest backside of all this diplomacy, and that is that it's still rooted in this like fundamental "we're better than you" kind of I guess we could call it racism.
I agree. I think Cypher, that is one out of three factors. If you have to, in my head, you have to combine three things to get there.
Revenge
one of them is
number one.
Okay, four then. Okay, yeah, you're right. So that's one of them where you were talking about. I don't even know if it's called racism, but it's just, I guess, yeah, you can call that racism. Let's do that. Then revenge.
The other thing is just, the proper word would be chauvinism.
Chauvinism. There you go. I think that's a better word, because racism just gets flown about nowadays just to be cool and whatever. But there's that. I think there's definitely like the greed, capitalist greed, in the shape of the military-industrial complex. And honestly, just getting back to it again, just stupid politicians, ignorant politicians who didn't know things that are like a university student, somebody studying Afghanistan. I don't know if any university does Afghanistan studies, but somebody just studying Afghanistan studies like would know. Like, for instance, in the first 3 years, I know that there was loads of reports of Marines kicking in doors, like what I mentioned at the beginning, kicking in doors with the whole revenge thing, kicking in doors and just going into a compound, and there's Afghan women there. Dude, you can't do that with an Afghan guy, because like an Afghan guy sees that and he sees, listen, you just disrespected me in the biggest way possible. So obviously revenge plays a role in that, but I think it was literally just ignorance as well of the culture that you're dealing with. And I don't blame the soldiers so much for that. I think,
well, they're under orders, that they don't.
They're under orders,
and like, so we did get some cultural training, and mind you, this is 2009, not 2002, but in 2009 we got some cultural training. We got like the whole 5 pillars of Pashtunwali and stuff like that. But I also know that I paid attention to that a heck of a lot more than most people, because I have an anthropologist / sociologist for a mother. So that kind of thinking was inculcated in me from a very young age. That idea that like, people hate the term, but like cultural relativism and but in an anthropological sense, cultural relativism isn't being like, oh well, it's they're stoning women for not wearing a burqa. But that's their culture. No, that's not what cultural relativism is. You can still apply universal principles with cultural relativism. Yeah. The point of cultural relativism is to be able to treat them as a culture unto themselves. And that's core to anthropology. That's been core to anthropology since the turn of the 20th century. Franz Boas made that part of anthropology back in the 1890s. But that kind of thinking is just not taught. It's not like we got like little brochures that taught us a few things. The one word that I remember quite clearly is waterega, because that's like the most useful word, right? That's waterega means stop, right? Because you need to be able to yell at people like "Warega, Warega," and like, you know, you're in some sort of situation that you need to keep people away, and that's the one word you can just yell. I used to know how to say "go home" and stuff like that, but it's been years. And we had like a little brochure on that, but we were never told like, this is important, this will be core to your mission, you should spend a lot of time looking at this and trying to understand them. Instead, it was just like, here's something to look at, cool. You know, even in the training, when we got cultural training, we barely were told that this is important. We were basically just handed a brochure, given a like 20-minute class, and then go right back to war exercises. And it's like, that would have been really useful. Now, obviously, trying to train soldiers to be culturally sensitive, bit of a fraught task there, but at the very least, they could have pretended that it was important, you know?
Yeah. Dude,
and
for me, a lot of this just falls down squarely on the shoulders of political leaders. Dude, it's just, and the thing is, this is the thing. I don't want to sound like a broken record who's just ranting about the same thing. Is people need to be more ambitious to the standards that they hold politicians to. Like, if I say, like, there's loads of people, my friends have bad opinions about Afghanistan, where I'm like, dude, how did you even come up with that? Shush. But that's fine, because that's not his job to come up with really good political opinions. His job is an accountant. Like, so be a good accountant. That's where I'm going to judge you. A politician, you have to make those good decisions, man.
I've heard a few politicians actually saying that, like, that Afghanistan is a war for oil, and it's just like, what oil? And that kind of stuff is like, it's like, you're the decision maker. Like, you should know better. But that is actually kind of like one of the essential problems with a democracy, is that we choose people. And if it's the job of these people we choose to know better, why would they market that skill to us, the voters?
Because that's their job, dude. That's their job.
But the voters don't care.
But that's the problem. See, for me, that's the biggest. For me, the thing I'm the most shocked about sci-fi is that Americans aren't, like, I hear a little bit being spoken about by the military-industrial complex on the internet and this and that. Dude, when I hear that, for instance, Dick Cheney, who was the vice president and who had a major role in, the war on terror, and that he potentially profited from this because of his position in Lockheed Martin, for me, that guy should be standing trial right now. Like, give him the biggest sentence hanging over his head.
There's
like
far worse that he is responsible for. He is significantly responsible for the U.S. torture program, and that makes him a war criminal.
For me, honestly, I would be like, maybe this is going to make me sound twisted, sci-fi. I think the other thing is worse, because the other thing, what you're doing is, you're tricking a nation, Americans. Hey, we're doing this for democracy. And then you're doing it from your own profit. It's worse
in the cost of human life, but in terms of just something you can absolutely nail him on, because this is getting it into territory that's like,
tough and murky.
Like you're also implying that, he pushed for this because of his positions, and he wasn't part of Lockheed Martin during his time. He actually divested during his vice presidency. That's a very common misconception, because people like to say that he was part of Halliburton, and it's a war for oil, and it's like, he divested from Halliburton during the election. During the 2000 election, so no. But the now, did he have sympathies that kind of biased his decisions? Yeah, duh. But it's not as clean cut when it comes to that. This is where I'm saying, like, you're getting into dangerous territory when you
have to be careful, and it is dangerous territory. I like that. You sound like a very sensible man, but I do think that this is an important enough issue to try to come up with some sort of a sensible resolution, rather than just kill that person or like put him in prison for like 70 years for doing this corrupt thing. But I do think there should be some sense of accountability. Like if there's even a chance that you were responsible for something like this and you get away with it, for me, that's a failure of the judicial system.
But it's also because this goes back to that question about like, you know, how do OEF vets deal with what's happening? Watching everything we fought for just go down the drain, right? And, you know, watching as people clamor to come to the United States and somehow haven't been deported. Like I got a lot of anger built up on all that and sorrow. But it is also grappling with part of how a good way that veterans can deal with this is by realizing we didn't decide to fight. Politicians did. They made the decisions. They made the decision on turning this into a nation-building project. Ultimately, George Bush is the one to point the blame at. He started the PRTs. He chose to remain there. If you want to go further, Obama decided to keep advisory troops there after 2014.
Didn't he bump up the presence of troops at the beginning?
Yeah, there was a surge. I was actually part of the surge.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, 2010.
Yeah. I didn't realize that I was part of the surge at the time. Actually, we were talking about the surge, and we'd talk about like all the because we got to the FOB in July of 2009, and you know, we had all this open space. We'd park our stuff anywhere we damn well pleased. I mean, it was a tiny FOB. Like this is a FOB that was literally set up by Russians back in the 80s. But like I was literally sleeping in a Russian barracks. But although we had air conditioning.
Nice.
But there was this sudden influx of people in like December, January time frame of that. And that's what we thought the surge was. Turns out we were actually part of the surge, but well, not exactly, since I was part of the PRTs and that started in 2005. But you know, we were there throughout the surge time.
Around that time, yeah.
Yeah, and but the surge actually did what it was supposed to do. We got Osama bin Laden in 2011. You know, that was the ultimate goal. So, one, for veterans, we can still have a sense of accomplishment. We took revenge for 9/11. Absolutely. I don't think anybody can argue otherwise. But for instance, my job there as Sec 4 for the PRT, well, that is a total loss. I mean, ultimately, we did help people. We also had a hospital on my FOB that like was better than the local hospital. So oftentimes they would send folks our way, but they also would, just like the surrounding villages would come our way. We also did like free clinic stuff out in the west and that.
What kind of projects was your PRT team responsible for? Like any road building?
Road building, plenty of that. We had.
But see, that's the thing, dude. Like, how
the biggest project that we had was a prison, but we also had like right at the beginning we had finished a big batch of hydroelectric stuff. It wasn't a dam; they were like little things that stick out in the water, but not all the way. I don't know how that works, but you know, we had basically electrified a good chunk of Kunar.
That area, yeah.
But we also had a bunch of like phone stuff. I don't really know how that worked because it was like just a tower in the middle of nowhere.
See, that's what I mean, Cypher. Like, if you worked with the PRT, how can you say like you can't, like, you find it tough to see like what, like the impact of your activity there? Like, dude, I went there in 2013, and I'm telling you right now, because that road that I used to go from Kabul to Paktia, it was built by a PRT.
Did you have to go under the? Did you have to go through that tunnel bridge, that really famous one that kept on getting blown up?
Just north of Kabul?
No,
that's north. No, I had to go southwest.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I
I got
don't
it just
exactly
from
know where
together.
Paktia is.
Paktia has like 3 provinces below Nangarhar and Kunar.
Is on the border.
Yeah, it's on the border with Waziristan
Oh,
and
is that the
Pakistan.
is? You might
It's
not know
just
it, but
above like
in
Kandahar.
2009, I think that's yeah, because that I
There's
might be
been a lot of fighting there.
mixing up Paktia with
Khost.
Coast. Yeah.
See, that's the thing, Saifa. Khost, Paktia, and Paktika all used to be one province. It's only been like a few decades since it's been compartmentalized into
Oh,
different.
okay.
But it's all part of something called Loya Paktia, which means Greater Paktia. Those 3
Okay.
provinces
That's
together.
probably why. I think it was Coast that was the headquarters for my.
There's a lot of fighting there, especially the Haqqani network. They're like
Yeah,
from there, basically.
but I think Paktia was where I forgot his name, but somebody basically deserted in 2009 and then got picked up by the Taliban, and he was under them for like 3 years or something like that. You might remember hearing about all this because it was a big deal. Diverted a lot of resources trying to find him.
What was it, like a Western guy?
Yeah, it was an American. He went AWOL and absent without leave. And
and then he reappeared like 5 years later. He was a prisoner of the Taliban. He converted or something.
Yeah.
Islam. Okay, yeah. Was that Paktia? Yeah. Okay. I didn't know that.
I think it was Paktia.
Okay.
Yeah, because it was just a couple provinces south of mine. Yeah, but still on the border, right?
Yeah. Waziristan is just on the border.
Yeah. Okay. But the where was I going with that?
Just the veterans.
Oh,
and
veterans, and yeah. So especially like you can have a sense of accomplishment that you have impacted these people's lives for the better, at least in that regard.
Dude, that's a huge regard. That is the regard if you think about it. And plus, if you think about it from an American perspective,
like my platoon's official kill count was 75, so that's pretty high, you know. Especially considering there's only 32 dudes,
right?
So
I don't want to say it's a war these things happen, but it's a war these things happen. My point is that going past that point, that there are Afghans who, like my family back in Afghanistan, they use roads built by American PRT teams in that region. Like, it's kind of tough. It doesn't even make sense for somebody to say, I don't have a sense of accomplishment. Like, do you remember what I said of when I was in 99 in Afghanistan in 2013?
Dirt everywhere.
It's 2 different countries. It's 2 different countries,
But
and that
you have to also
remember
what the PRTs were ultimately there for. It wasn't just to build and to make people's lives better. It was to fight for their hearts and minds. Yeah. And we lost that.
Yeah, but you guys didn't go about it in the right way, man. You guys
that we've been talking about how we failed and how it was kind of screwed up from the beginning, but it's really hard for veterans to kind of deal with that, especially watching as everything falls apart.
Yeah. No, I can empathize with that.
It's this gut-wrenching thing, but we have accomplished some things. We did build roads, we did materially benefit these people in a way. I mean, ultimately we could have been using all that money for ourselves, but we didn't. And
you guys have enough money anyway. You can
we did just use literally last year we used the exact same amount of money that we've used for the entire war on terror on quantitative easing.
Yeah, dude,
quantitative literally
easing is a scary concept.
It's a weird thing. But technically they created $2 trillion in quantitative easing. That's the entire cost of the war on terror.
Dude, state intervention in the economy to me is just scary.
That includes Iraq, Syria, all the stuff going on right now. Like, that's not just Afghanistan. That's the entire war on terror, and they did it like that.
This is why people need to jump on Bitcoin and cryptos. Are you into cryptos, by the way?
No.
Dude.
Don't say it. You're going to ruin the comment section.
Really? No, I'm heavy into cryptos now. I was a denier, but
there's
now
people
I love cryptos.
who will instantly start being like, "You're into crypto. Here's a shady link," you know. But um, the the money is actually kind of immaterial because while it has been a long war, it's so high because it's been so long.
Right.
A lot less Americans seem a lot less suspicious of corruption.
No,
I don't
it's
get that
kind of
sense at all.
no, it's kind of echoing what I was saying about, like, if I'm an American citizen, say even if I'm an American vet, like holding my politicians a little bit more accountable for, dude, where were you putting this money in? Like, why did the government that you were backing for 20 years fall in 10 days? Like, somebody has to be blamed for this. And like, personally, I would hold American politicians
Yeah,
in
and
then they're not
oh,
all the blame, but a lot of it goes to them, I think.
that was the other thing I wanted to get at with the whole veteran. Like, how can veterans process this? It's blame politicians. Like,
I love that. That's always the
like
answer in life. Blame politicians.
like it's not
Honestly.
your fault that everything failed. It's
Yeah.
their fault. Like, whether or not I like the uh, we don't fight for hearts and minds of the USA is true. But
Mm.
the but when we changed to this nation building project, that was fundamentally going to fail from the get go. Like that ultimately was doomed to failure. Unless we wanted to be there for the next 20 years, it would take another like 20 years, and we would have to be actively there. We couldn't do this Vietnamization thing, which another parallel to Vietnam.
Vietnam.
Nixon started this whole idea of Vietnamization, which
I
is
heard about
essentially
it, yeah.
handing off combat duties to Vietnamese soldiers.
I've seen that great picture of a scarecrow being given like a PRK machine gun, and it's a scarecrow. It's like a representation of Vietnamization.
Uh,
It's like a
huh,
classic one back in the day. We had to study it for one of my exams.
huh.
But it's a scarecrow, so it can't actually do anything, obviously. But it's got the best weaponry, and it's got loads of ammo, etc.
But the it failed then, and it failed here. We
Yeah.
basically since 2014 we have committed to Afghanistanization.
Yeah.
That's essentially what we've been doing for the last 6 years, 7 years.
Mm.
Was acting as advisors. In a sense, the war has been over for a while.
Yeah, yeah. The actual
So
fighting of it, you can definitely say, yeah. But
yeah,
yeah,
and
but there's
so as
so much.
soon as we pulled out, we were the only things holding up that government. Um,
Definitely.
and
Yeah.
while we were propping it up, we were not the main fighters. We were propping
Mm.
up the fighters. But as soon as that support is gone, the the will to fight is gone.
But see,
We
that's the thing, is like that doesn't need to be the equation that turned out to be the equation this time. And a lot of the times you can argue that it will turn out like that, but it doesn't inherently have to be like that. Because one of the huge mistakes, blunders that the Americans made is they put their trust in the wrong people to prop up. Like, I'm seeing, I'm a ordinary person, right, Cypher? I just have access to Google, and I can right now check up an article where a person who used to be a vice president, a WikiLeaks report came out that person apparently funneled $50 million in a private jet to the United Arab Emirates. Why does that person, a vice president of Afghanistan, have $50 million? I don't understand.
Yeah,
Like,
well, I
and
mean,
if you're an American
the president,
policymaker,
the
hold that
the
guy.
the president who fled just last week.
Ashraf
Um,
Ghani, yeah.
yeah, I found it. There's an article from him in the LA Times in 1989 talking
Mm,
about how the now that the Soviets have left, the that the puppet government will fall now, and it's
yeah.
like, wait, who wrote this?
Yeah.
It's
Apparently,
like,
that guy left with 4 cars that
yeah,
were filled with cash to
yeah,
Dubai. I don't even know
and
how you would transport that, but okay.
uh, Well, I think he went to Uzbekistan, right?
Apparently he went to Uzbekistan, but yeah, I think he went to Uzbekistan first, and then now he's in United Arab Emirates. They granted him
Yeah.
some sort of a visa.
So he probably just drove there. The from there, probably took a cargo plane or something. I don't know, but like he probably just drove there. I mean, that's same. Dostum went to Uzbekistan as
But
well.
he was literally on the border. He was in Mazar-e
Yeah,
Sharif, which you can
yeah.
go to the border from Kabul. That was surrounded by the Taliban. I think he was airlifted. I don't think he drove. That's too dangerous for him.
It was surrounded by then.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was.
yeah. Kabul was the only thing left.
We measure project success by dollars spent rather than actual effects. Self-licking ice cream cones.
I'm not mad at that. I like the sarcasm.
This
is a vet as well, I'm guessing.
And that's the thing. Like, while it's gut-wrenching to see this happen, it is also like this is like it happened really freaking quick, and I think there's a lot of we could have done a lot better in terms of the pullout, especially like there are Americans' lives who are at stake right now because of how poorly we have pulled out, and that's right on the I was about to say Obama. Thanks, Obama. That's right on the Biden administration. Like
Americans? Which Americans are on the line?
There are approximately 1,000 Americans still in Kabul right now that haven't been haven't gotten out yet.
So you're not talking about like the soldiers that are in control of the airport? Oh, okay, 1,000. That's a big number. Bloody hell! What's the American government doing?
Well, so one, we've negotiated with the Taliban to basically keep the airport open while we're doing this mass evacuation, and they seem to be abiding by that. But like, there's so many things we could have done, like keeping Bagram open. Bagram was this massive base that was perfectly secure. We could have basically been like, we're keeping Bagram open until all Americans are out of the country. Right?
Yeah.
Although there was still this like idea that somehow the government could hold on to that. Now, the fact that it happened in a matter of weeks rather than months or years, I think that's surprising to everyone.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure. But we could have easily just kept Bagram open. It's not like it was perfectly secure. There's no reason to leave it. But that's me starting to play armchair historian, and I'm actually in an armchair. Like, the pullout has been a disaster, and it would have been a disaster no matter what, but I think it could have been done a lot better. And there's a lot of questions there, but ultimately we knew this was coming. Like, we knew that this was never going to end well. Although, gotta love that Biden quote where he's like, "You're never going to see anybody getting airlifted by helicopters off the embassy roof," and it's like 2 days later. Oops.
Yeah.
But like, it's like part of dealing with loss, and then ultimately this is a loss. We're going to have to deal with it, and like, we've discussed kind of like what is going to happen with the we've discussed what's going to happen with the Taliban in the country now that they're in control. We've discussed kind of like the larger context of everything and some of the historical parallels and that. And I know that you're running out of time, right? You need to get to bed.
Yeah. Not to bed. I got to do something, but yeah, I'm running out of time.
Well, you're also we're dealing with two completely different time zones.
Yeah,
like definitely. It's afternoon right now here.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. I'm looking at your background. It's like proper dark out here.
Yeah, but it's because you're in Britain. I saw Punksai in the comments. He's in New Zealand, so I got folks all over the world.
Wow, you gotta love the internet.
Yeah, actually we've had a lot of viewership today. Where is it? It's currently at
That's all.
685.
By the way, I
That's a
just
lot
want
of
to say
concurrent
that
viewers.
that's mainly for me. I think they're coming for me. I'm the star of this show. No, I'm kidding. That's what I want to think. See, somebody just said Tarek is a cool guy. I like that person.
Yeah, and by the way, guys, if we said it at the beginning, and I'll say it again, if there's links to his channel in the description below. We'll also remember that the causes of the Afghanistan causes of the war on terror episode included him. So be sure to check out his channel.
Should we do this one final question? This one looks like a good one. Okay, there's another one.
Another one, yeah.
Damn, you're popular. I need to start doing this. So people just like donate money and whatever?
Yeah, so these things, you can see the little price thing. It's just, they're called super chats, and they get, you can run it however you want. But my thing is that I always, if they do a super chat, I always try to put it on the screen, and at least, and
nice.
And for centralizing resources in 2014, yeah, I mean, that's why we shouldn't have freaking abandoned it so quickly. But let's go back to Koala's question.
Karzai?
What happened to Hemi Karzai?
That guy's an interesting guy, man.
Because he was president all the way until what, like 2012 or something?
No, 2014 when you guys put
okay.
It was him, and then it was Ashraf Ghani. But that guy is like Littlefinger from, if you watch Game of Thrones, Peter Baelish. Because even, I mean, when he was in power, like, because the Americans were still their active presence, he couldn't create better relations with the Taliban too much because they were considered the enemies of America at the time. But since he's left the government, he's made a lot of overtures to the Taliban, like in the years after 2015, 16, 17, 18. And there was pictures literally like 2-3 days ago of him and Abdullah Squared, I like to call him, the CEO guy, who didn't want to accept that he lost the flipping election. So they had to create a random position for him. And then people wonder why ordinary people like the Taliban, for the justice they bring, and they hate that corrupt, inept Afghan government. When this guy was just being a crybaby, he said, I don't want to lose the election. When he lost it, he literally lost it fair and square. He said, no, I'm not accepting this. Create a position for me. Crybaby. But anyway, they were all together with like Talib leaders in Kabul, and they were all sitting down, like smiling and having tea. So it looks like some sort of a reconciliation government.
If he doesn't have ties, he is at least friendly to the Taliban.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Because he came from a fairly prominent family the last like 3-4 decades in Kandahar and whatnot, and he's just got tribal links to certain Talibs in the past and whatever. And he looks like a sneaky little politician, but we'll see.
I actually was in the room with him once.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he came to Kunar, and like he was at the governor's mansion there, or compound, I don't know what to call it. And because we spent a lot of time at the governor's compound. In fact, there was a two American soldiers that stayed at the compound at all times. No, 3, but one of them was always sleeping. 2 on, 2 off, 2 on, 1 off kind of thing.
Dude, you want to hear something crazy about him? His brother, I don't even know what capacity. I think his brother was involved with the Kabul bank. It's like one of the biggest banks in Afghanistan. And there was a story from around the time you were stationed there, actually, where a couple of people left the bank with almost $1 billion. I think it was like $965 million. And he was one of the guys implicated in it. And he didn't come to justice. Obviously, he's living large now.
Wait, he robbed the bank?
Yeah, it was like him, and there was like a couple of other guys, and it's like $1 billion
during the presidency.
And his brother is the president, and it's like, so you wonder why people didn't support that government, the national government, America. It's like, okay, that's why. That makes sense. Corrupt politicians.
We've slow rolled the. I mean that we have talked about this, that we the Terps, by the way, Terps means interpreters.
Interpreters,
but we call them Terps. It's not derogatory. It's just shorthand.
No, I've heard it before. Yeah.
Well, I mean, some people. This is the internet. They're quick to offend. But like
Forget those people.
the and it's true. There's about 70,000 people who were supposed to be evacuated.
70. Damn, that's a big number. I didn't know it was that big.
Yeah.
Whoa.
We, as of this morning, we have evacuated 15,000.
Okay, pretty big number.
Especially considering the mass evacuation efforts have only started since last Sunday. So it's been less than a week, and we managed to do 15,000. They're doing flights constantly, 24/7. And like, I mean, you've seen all the footage of just people, the crowds at the airport and that. And yeah, well, it's a real shit show for sure. But like, you know, this is kind of what was going to happen. You know, I don't really see it. Now, should we have been evacuating these people for the last 2 years? Yeah.
Yeah, but that kind of shows, Cypher, if you did it for the last 2 years, that kind of shows, oh, you expect to lose.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? You can't really do that.
Yeah, and I mean, that's why this mass evacuation effort didn't start until the Taliban was literally at Kabul.
Yeah.
Because you know, there was this kind of blind faith that the central government would prevail. And if not prevail, at least stick out for more than a couple of weeks. And it just, as soon as they lost that political support, everything fell apart. You know, it was a house of cards built on, you know, American might, and as soon as that American might goes, the house of cards falls. But like, we have a duty to these people, and you know, that's why we're staying there for the time being, at least at the airport. There's something like 3,000 American troops at that airport. Well, I don't know if there were 2,000, and there's another 1,000 that are being deployed. I don't know if they're there yet. But that's actually a significant number. For reference, there were less than 3,000 American troops in the country in 2002. So, you know, this is actually a pretty major effort. At the height of the surge, there were, I believe, 25,000 American troops at the height. So
25? Are you sure? Wasn't it like 100 at one point? I completely off?
I didn't think we exceeded more than that.
Really?
Look it up.
I want to look this up because I've always been referencing 100,000 Afghanistan American troops at one time.
I have it pre-saved, freaking Afghan troop levels by year. It hit 100,000. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, in like 2011 or 2010, no?
Yeah, and then it went right back down to. Okay, so yeah, I was off by quite a bit. But it hit 100,000. But you look over there at 2002, and look how low that was.
Send me the note. What are you looking at? I don't know what you're looking at.
The BBC.
Okay. American troops, Afghanistan by year. Let's do that.
Hold on. I can private message you the URL.
Ah, perfect.
It's just the first result that came up.
Damn, look at that. It was literally like 5,000 in the beginning. Wow.
Yeah, it was really low. Like, there was a time when well, you can also see after 2014, it just
yeah.
And it stayed at about, what is that, like 10,000, I'm guessing. From 2014 onward, we've had a very small troop presence there. But the that shows our commitment to getting these people out, is that we are sending so many troops back in just to secure one airport. Because there's also the fear that, like, what if the Taliban decides to assault us? You know?
Yeah.
They already have so much equipment in that they could they challenge. They could easily challenge American might there. The only thing they don't have is air power. Well, they do have aircraft. Good luck using it, and also, they might have had javelins way back when, but we got better ones now.
Yeah.
And we got jets. They don't.
Yeah. But I
but-
think like backdoor political negotiations have taken place that's going to ensure Americans don't fight the Talibs. It just looks like there
was negotiations yesterday in the UAE, at the UAE, between Taliban officials and American State Department officials.
Yeah.
So like there is some negotiations on this, but we're also kind of at this cusp of like, are we going to recognize them as the legitimate government?
Yeah, but see, that's the thing though. Is like I feel like we're gonna get into a brand new discussion, and I really have to go.
Yeah, you need to go.
Yeah, but we'll just have to wait and see, man. Because if the Taliban really have reformed like they say they are, then why not? Like, we would know. What do you like? Maybe you don't like it because obviously you were fighting this war this whole time. But what are you really gonna do? You want to reinvade? No. So then,
but recognition is not invasion. It is saying that it is a legitimate government. We will treat you as a UN member or something along those lines. Instead, there is not recognizing them, and that is perfectly an option. And generally, the world tends to go the way the U.S. goes. If we don't offer recognition, most of the world will not recognize them. Honestly, that means that they will be shunned from the international community.
Fair enough. But I think that's just going to lead to a greater problem, and it's going to lead to another war in terrorism. It's going to lead to more impetus and motivation from people in the Islamic world that are like, why are you guys being so mean? These people literally want to support this government that they think is legitimate. I know in the past they were weirdos and they did a bunch of weird stuff, but now their own people really like them. It's like, why are you being mean for not accepting them into the international fold?
We've been fighting them for 20 years.
Exactly. Yeah, it's tough. Yeah. But dude, I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, you need to get going. I'm going to stick around and answer some questions. Also, I want to talk a little bit about like some specifically American context about like there's this whole thing about anger over a lost war that I need to talk about, but you don't need to be here for that. That's going to be very American centric.
Okay.
But it's been great having you on. The links to his channel are below. Hikma History, great channel. You want to learn more about Afghanistan or like just the Islamic world in general.
Yeah, in general. I'm doing a lot of Islamic history Afghan history videos at the moment. But if you look through my videos, there's the Fatimids, the Ottomans, Islamic Spain, a bunch of stuff. So a little bit for everyone.
And especially trying to understand this war, you went really deep into like the Soviet stuff and the coup that preceded it, and you've continued that series. So
and I even have a video, by the way, on the last king of Afghanistan, which is like my longest video. It's really cool, and it's actually to do with like my PhD. That's why I enjoyed it so much. So if people are really interested in Afghanistan, check that out, because that's a very different Afghanistan to the one you see now. That's before the war.
Yeah.
But
it's been great having you on, and sorry to have kept you longer than you needed to.
No problem, man, Cypher. This was awesome. This is literally my first live stream I've ever done, and I think you've inspired me. I think I'm gonna start doing my own live streams.
They're great, but try not to overdo them.
Okay. No worries. But I appreciate you, Cypher. Thank you, and I'm gonna go. Take care, everyone. Bye.
So I'm going to continue talking because there's one thing that I have to really talk about that is worrisome for the future, and especially for veterans. So there's this great book by a woman named Kathleen Bellew. I have it digitally. Let me try to pull it up real quick. It's called "Bring the War Home," and the main premise. Oh, I have it on. I have it on Google Books. Hold on. uh, so the main premise is that the Vietnam War inspired a great deal of ill feelings. Let me go back here. You know, I just don't need to see my notes, but I think I can screen share. Hold on. Share. Oh, I can share video files apparently. Cool. Yeah, there we go. So Bring the War Home. It's a great book, especially if you want to understand like white supremacy in that. But it's really talking about how losing Vietnam really inspired the white power movement following it. You saw a resurgence in the Klan. You saw a resurgence in the in neo-Nazis and everything, and they really got together in a place called Aryan Nations. And just north of Aryan Nations, that's where one of the attendees happened to be a guy named Randy Weaver, who got in a shootout with the ATF in 1991 or 92, 91, something like that. Then, and that was called, at a place called Ruby Ridge. You might have heard of it. Then you also have Waco the following year, and then of course the Oklahoma City bombing. All of this related to this white power movement that became resurgent because of the Vietnam War. This is the thing that we really have to take into consideration when we're talking about American politics following this, because we are facing a very real resurgence in white supremacy here. We saw how much like the Proud Boys and other stuff like that played a part in the 2020 election and then eventually January 6th. And these things can't be removed from the ill feelings surrounding Afghanistan, and it's only going to get worse now because I mean, I'm feeling the pain of this withdrawal. You know, this horrendous drop, and and that same kind of hatred is what fueled the white supremacist movement of the 70s and 80s. For instance, the Klan's first move after Vietnam, was to go after Vietnamese refugees, especially in Houston, to the point that Houston police actually had to protect fishermen from getting dynamited. And it only got worse from there. The Greensboro Massacre happened 2 years later. And that's why I highly recommend reading Bellew's book. It will give you a whole new perspective of how, this kind of losing a war can turn into a domestic psychosis. And we're going to be bringing in a bunch of Afghan refugees, right? I've already seen people like Tucker Carlson talking, literally echoing David Duke. David Duke being the one who was orchestrating this attack on the Vietnamese fishermen. And he did a whole piece just recently saying, like, they're going to come and replace us and stuff like that. And it's like, that's exactly the kind of rhetoric that led to things like, Ruby Ridge, Waco, and Oklahoma City. And Bellew's book culminates in with Ruby Ridge. So the like this is something we need to take account for, and it's one of the things that this is why I was kind of like it's a very American thing. You're not going to see the same kind of movement in Britain or anything. This is very American. And the war on terror isn't even done, right? We still have troops in Syria. We still have troops in Somalia. We still have troops in Kenya. We still have troops in Mali. We still have Navy stuff parked all over the Middle East. We still have troops in Qatar. We still have drones flying all over Yemen. This is stuff that is going to continue, unlike Vietnam. We didn't have that, although white supremacists did try to basically filibuster like Rhodesia and that, but that's old history. Also, guys, say hi to King, who has now decided to turn away. Say hi, King. Say hi. He's like, I just woke up. I don't want to be awake. Leave me alone. But yeah, this is another thing I was thinking about last night, was watching all this stuff as I was preparing for this live stream, was kind of going like, it really is going to be like Vietnam. I did a poll on Twitter a while back, like, hey, what is the closest war to this? We've talked about like the Philippines War, we talked about the Panchavia expedition, we've talked about but Vietnam really is kind of the closest approximation. Now, not in purpose, and certainly not in size, but in terms of outcome, yeah, pretty much the same. And so we're going to have this long-term national trauma of losing this war. And I don't know how we get over that. I have no answer. I've only can talk about what's happened before. History really only teaches you what not to do, not what to do. But this loss, this national trauma, that is very analogous to Vietnam. Another one that I haven't really talked about was the Banana Wars. Because the Banana Wars, funny enough, were actually longer wars. We fought in Nicaragua from 1911 to 1934. And for those who are counting, that's almost an entire decade longer than we have been in Afghanistan. So it's a weird thing. Although I just saw Dom Drill, I don't know how to say that, talking about the all-volunteer army. So that is something that is significantly different from this war in Vietnam. There was no draft, right? The war was also significantly smaller. More than 500,000 troops were deployed in Vietnam at one time. We never actually went above 100,000, at least according to the BBC. So that's a significantly different numbers, right? It's 1/5 the size, despite being in a larger country. But the draft was never instituted. Technically, I volunteered for the army. I did not volunteer for Afghanistan. That doesn't mean that I chose to go to Afghanistan. I chose to be in the army because I wanted to pay for college. Part of the reason why I can even be a historian is because I went into the army. And I didn't actually have a choice in going to Afghanistan. In fact, there was going to be a volunteer mission to Iraq, but then Iraq was fizzling out in 2009, so they canceled that and then turned it into a mandatory mission to Afghanistan. So I was literally one of 2 people in my platoon who did not volunteer for Iraq, and and then they were like, "Oh, by the way, you're going to Afghanistan anyways." It's like, but but there's going to be people who are dismissive of that, going like, well, you volunteered for this. And in a way it's true, but not exactly, right? And notice the reason why I joined. The reason I joined was because my parents could not pay for my college. I had terrible grades in high school, so there was no chance of me getting a scholarship of any sort. And I had to and yeah, no thanks. But the there is going to be quite a few people who are dismissive of what veterans went through, which reincurs exactly there was this kind of stab in the back myth that fueled white supremacy after Vietnam. This myth that the government had betrayed the veterans, and not true, but that doesn't really matter to conspiracists, right? They see a conspiracy, and they start talking about how Zionists have occupied the government, and that's a a real outcome of losing a war like this. And unlike Vietnam, we started this for revenge, right? And we got our revenge. I don't think anybody couldn't say that we didn't accomplish that goal. But the mission has changed, and it had changed by the time I was there a decade ago. And the question is, does that mean that we're going to treat this like the same? Are we going to just poo-poo all the veterans who are feeling like they've been betrayed? Or are we going to try to have some sort of national reconciliation? I certainly hope so. For instance, we actually have a permanent GI Bill. Vietnam veterans did not get a GI Bill until, I believe, 1976, like after Saigon had fallen. And the Montgomery GI Bill started in 1982, if I remember correctly. And so there's still there are veterans benefits now that didn't exist for a lot of Vietnam vets. But you'll find that within the white supremacy movement in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, it was led by a lot of Vietnam vets. A lot. And they talked constantly about how the government had betrayed them. And we're looking at that same thing. So I want to take just a couple more questions before signing off. It's been a great stream. It's been almost 3 hours, so I figure cut off around 3 hours. So I'll take a few more questions. For instance, what is this? Why do you think folks call the Afghan War one for resources? Well, that's just kind of like the default position for people who, don't really want to bother looking things up. It's the same thing like anytime you have some sort of political thing somebody is against, they're not looking for actual reasons to explain the thing. They're looking for something that they can be against, right? Anything to push their political position. Um, it wasn't. It never was. It isn't now, and it never will be. But but it is a convenient story. It's convenient for people who are against the war. Um, I pointing out that Afghanistan doesn't have resources is, should be the end of it. But, they'll find something. They'll say, like, well, it has opium. It's like, well, the U.S. has been actively trying to destroy the opium trade. Well, but, and so, like, you're not talking about reasonable discussion there. You're talking about people who already have an idea of what they want to believe, and they're going to believe it no matter what you say. So Colin asks, what is the realistic possibility that the Taliban has reformed? Yeah, no. And if they have, what are the chances they regress to their old ways? They started off the same way in the 1990s. They talked a big game about how they were, fighting for Afghanistan, and they did end corruption. That's true. And they've ended corruption again. This is right out of their playbook. They're not doing anything differently. All this stuff about, like, oh, well, they're giving women's rights, is like they didn't start really being completely oppressive of women until the mid to late 90s. They started in 1994. So, it's kind of missing the point there. It's kind of missing the history there. And I mean, of course, news agencies are going to report that, like, oh, well, they've reformed. They're saying they've reformed because, I mean, it's just good news. I mean, like, they want something to report, right? But, like, reporters are not historians. We can look at the history of the Taliban and see that they're doing the same. They're playing by the same rule book. Doran says, have you heard some American war songs about Afghanistan? I know about Russian songs and the Afghan-Chechen wars. Is there? Yeah, Rise Against has a song about the Afghanistan war. They have, I can't remember the name of it. Hold on, I can actually pull it up real quick. Let me pull up Media Monkey. I can just screen share. Hold on a second. We share screen. Share screen. Making it really difficult here. There we go. Oh, that's terrible. Whoa, no, stop. Okay. Don't know why I did that. But if we go to music and search Rise Against Hero of War, that's the name of it. 2008. That's probably actually more about Iraq. But then they also have I Don't Want to Be Here Anymore. That one, I believe, is also... No, that's not. But there are some. You can find them. And I like punk music, so yeah, it's a good song. Have you heard about investigation into Australian war crimes in Afghanistan by the SASR? No, I have not. I know of several war crime investigations, nothing specifically about Australia. They made a movie about it recently. It was called like Kill Team or something like that. But there's been quite a few war crimes, and they unlike Vietnam, they're actually like there's stuff being done about them. Unlike the My Lai massacre, we've actually like actively prosecuted American war criminals. Well, except for in Iraq, but in Afghanistan, yeah. Um, and Jonathan Richards says people seem increasingly partisan in their sympathies towards vets, dismissing those who aren't on their side of the party line. Yeah, that's pretty normal. How much will that affect the processing of national trauma? This is a hell of a question. uh, so, uh, hold on, I need a drink for this one. This is a tough question, but an important question. So, I remember when I came back, I was called a baby killer a couple of times. Like seriously, I had people to my face call me a baby killer. Um, and one who I thought was a friend, and not jokingly either. I mean, like straight up, oh, you fought in Afghanistan? No, you're a baby killer. It's like, the hell is wrong with you? And yeah, it's going to. Oh, somebody just woke up. It's going to be difficult. It will make the processing of national trauma more difficult. It doesn't help the fact that we are compounding national trauma, right? We have 9/11, and I think we have adequately revenged 9/11 by now. I don't think we need any more war. But like somebody brought up like how 70,000 people were supposed to get visas to leave Afghanistan, and they haven't, right? Sleepy kitty. And it is a real thing. I am definitely seeing people becoming more partisan. Hell, I've had people on episodes start commenting more about like my service and saying, oh, you're a soldier of empire and blah blah blah, that kind of BS. I'm also seeing people talking on Twitter about they make the destruction of America like their personality type. And these are exactly the kind of individuals that will alienate veterans, and some of those veterans will turn to white supremacy. Absolutely. And the Twitter mob will make it difficult to even process some of this stuff. Now, on the other hand, I saw, I was drinking last night. I found out that a friend was actually executed by the Taliban back last year. And, I kind of had a bit of outpouring of emotion on Twitter. And people just, like a bunch of people were just like, I love you, man. Like, just hang in there. Process it however you can. I'm here for you. Like, I had a bunch of people just saying, like, I'm here for you, man. And like, especially considering I'm tend to be on the other side of the political spectrum from a lot of veterans. That's heartwarming to see. And I think that as long as that kind of outpouring of respect remains commonplace, it will keep this country from falling back into instead of January 6th being a one-time occurrence and could become a regular occurrence. And I mean, there was a guy caught with a freaking bomb in his truck just like a couple days ago or something like that, driving towards the Capitol. I think he was stopped by like a checkpoint or something like that, and they found the bomb. But anyways, as long as that kind of outpouring of respect remains common, of course, people will weaponize anybody who steps out of line, right? So as soon as somebody says something like "fuck you," you work, you were a soldier of empire, you don't deserve any respect, or something like that. You know, people will screen cap that, be like, look at what the liberals are doing, and they'll use that for political ammunition in and of itself. So the only thing there is hold the line. Don't let these people say anything like that unchallenged. When they say things like that, challenge them, ban them, block them, whatever. Do not let them, you know, make processing the national trauma more difficult. Got about 5 minutes left. So Koala says, thoughts about the possible China's encroachment into Afghanistan. Do you think they would end up losing like Russian and the Americans? I don't think they're actually going to make a move. There's that one valley that's off in a little bit that tends to have issues. The U.S. and China actually almost came to blows at one point during this war because of that place. But otherwise, I don't think. I know they have that whole Belt and Road thing, strategy, whatever you want to call it. But it's not like they're not sending troops into Africa when they're building roads and everything. Hello, King. Go back to sleep. They aren't. They might recognize the Taliban. Like I could see that, and they might offer material support to the Taliban simply because the Taliban defeated us. But thank you, Hakanu. But oh, I missed another one. But I don't think China's really a significant issue here. And Jonathan Richard says, thank you for the thoughtful response to my question. I love your content. Hooah. Yeah, that's like part of doing this live stream is honestly me just kind of processing it. Like I've learned a lot by just talking it through, and especially talking it through with Hikma history. He offered a perspective that was something that I couldn't really see, right? And I think it's really important to have this kind of dialogue to work through this, because you notice he never was trying to say like, no, you're wrong, but he was also pointing out like, no, you guys still screwed up a lot of things strategically. There's all these issues. You didn't respect the people. Your government showed chauvinism towards the thing. Like he challenged the way that he challenged what I was talking about, or what the U.S. did, is that he was talking about the U.S. and not personally attacking me, right? That is important to continue. And I think it also is just really helpful to gaining some perspective, because that's ultimately one of the best things history can provide, right? Is perspective. It is. I mean, during Vietnam, Americans simply couldn't see that they saw it as a civil war. But during the Paris Peace Accords, it was laid bare, right? And Henry Kissinger made a big deal about like how he didn't truly understand the war and all that kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, sure, but you also like tried to hide the My Lai massacre, dude. But like the Henry Kissinger is a war criminal as well. But he did end the war, technically. But it was that lack of perspective that really guaranteed that the U.S. couldn't win that war, right? It is one of those things that we are always going to have to reevaluate. History is never settled. We might come up with a consensus sometime soon, but it will be challenged, and it needs to be challenged. We will be reassessing this for ages, and it will remain a national trauma for at least the next decade. We're not going to stop talking about the end of the Afghanistan War for the next 5 years. And considering it's coming right at the tail end of the coronavirus, which already is in of itself a national trauma. It's an international trauma, really. It's a worldwide trauma. This is part of the healing process, is understanding what happened. Because a lot of the time, a lot of that stuff, we were talking earlier about how the war is, there were so many mistakes made during the war, that that we chose to turn it into a nation building project. We chose to keep on advising after 2014. We chose to pull out so ridiculously quickly. We've made a bunch of mistakes, right? But a lot of that was because they were mistakes. They were not intentional. And in the heat of the moment, people don't realize what they're doing. They don't realize the full ramifications. They don't realize the full context of their decision making. There's a reason why when we talk about like the bombing of when they talk about like the bombing of Hiroshima, and Nagasaki, people we're now talking about like alternative explanations, right? That there might have been motivation because of the Russian push into Manchuria that was about to happen. There might have been, there might have been some sort of revenge motive because of Pearl Harbor. These are things that have been discussed before, but now the history profession has kind of started to allow that conversation to take place. It doesn't change the fact that it was absolutely to end the war. Anybody who says that it wasn't is lying. But these are other motivations behind the bomb, right? That's how it should be framed. There's Grant Hurst, who runs the Casual Historian, likes to tweet out regularly. He likes to tweet out saying, "Reject monocausal explanations," right? Yeah, we're gonna be re-looking at that. I think we've talked a lot about like the various causes of this war. I even made a video with Hikma History about that. But we need to be open to that. We need to not, stiffen up as soon as we hear these things questioned. That's the reason why when I'm talking about like the myths surrounding it, I'm not just instantly like, this is a myth, done. We don't need to talk about it anymore. We need to challenge it. We need to be able to look at the myths of it and be like, no, but we need to also be able to see that there will be more explanations that we're just not thinking of right now. There's going to be interpretations that come years, decades, maybe centuries down the line that we'll never have thought of today and will seem bloody obvious to people in the future. And the I think I've gone on long enough. So to wrap up, while Hikma history was here, we by the way, his channel, his links to his channel are below. Be sure to check him out. There's also links to all my previous episodes that cover Afghanistan. But we've to wrap it up, we've covered like the myths of this. The three main myths that I hear about Afghanistan is, graveyard of empires. That's kind of like a Afghan national myth, not really ours, but people still say it. The U.S. supported the Taliban. That's just nonsense. And then the whole war for oil thing, which is conflating a lot of things and just not really understanding the real complexity of what led to 9/11. We've also talked about like the difference between a punitive expedition and a nation building effort, right? Whether or not it's for whether or not it is for revenge or hearts and minds, right? And how the Afghanistan War can be thought of through these different lenses. We talked about the Afghan perspective of this, the look at why the Taliban might actually be like accepted by so many Afghans after 20 years of fighting them. We talked about like how the pullout has been pretty bad, to say the least. My role in it, what I've done there, specifically in that transition between nation building and punitive expedition. We've talked a little bit of, we've talked about what we accomplished. Building, we've materially benefited people's lives, but we've also talked about the consequences. This global war on terror, Iraq, Syria, North Africa, the Maghreb, I don't know how to say that, Maghreb region, whatever, Mali, basically. And like all this fighting throughout the Arab Peninsula as well. The 800,000 people who have lost their lives for the 3,000 Americans who did back on September 11th of 2001. 800,000 and 37 million people displaced. So I think America has gotten our pound of flesh, right? But we're also have talked about like what's all this mean for the future? This kind of talk about what is the Taliban going to do? What is the national trauma going to do? And especially I've tried to heavily emphasize historical parallels and what we can learn from the past. One of the greatest reasons for studying the past is to learn what not to do, right? As Santayana liked to say, those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it, right? Santayana was pretty spot on that. So looking at this stuff, one of my main takeaways, and obviously I'm coming from having fought this for so long, is that we really need to stop Wilsonianism. Like, we need to stop it dead in its tracks. We need to stop believing that we're fighting for democracy abroad. That should be considered done. Just done. To Afghans, as Tariq was saying, like, they don't care about what form of government their central government takes. They want safety. After 40 years of war, this war basically started in 1979, and that is quite the issue. And I think the main thing that is the difference between how like Afghans view it and how Americans view it is that Wilsonianism. If you're talking about defending democracy, you are essentially propagating Wilson's message. Um, you know, why don't we actually let them self-determine? Why don't we let them have their own sovereignty? And well, isn't that a great way to end a stream about a current war ending? Is to end it with a rant against Woodrow Wilson. So, without further ado, it has now been 3 hours, and so I think it is time to call it a day, everyone. I hope you had fun, and learned a bit and gained some perspective. I know I have. So, have a good day, everyone.